You've been walking for days. Your body aches. You're dripping with sweat from the heat of the sun bearing down overhead, and yet you're wrapped up in layers upon layers of clothing. Even your face is covered, and you're wearing thick black goggles so that not a single centimeter of your body is exposed. Your journey has been long, and you feel like you might die from exhaustion or from overheating due to these multiple layers of clothes. But dying is better than being exposed. You saw it happen when your entire team changed. The light cannot be trusted, not even for a fraction of a second. It's been like this for years. You've learned and survived through painful experience. Many of those you used to know cannot say the same. You've been alone for so long. You might have given up all hope if it wasn't for the distress signal coming from a nearby SCP Foundation containment facility, Site-46. Any kind of survivors would be better than nothing, no matter what kind of sorry shape they were in, as long as they were still human. You find your way to an opening in the side of a mountain and slide into the cave, hoping you weren't spotted. The whole world is crawling with those things now. You can't let yourself be seen. As you trudge down the cave towards the entrance, you see what looks like a huge black snail trail splattered on the ground, leading into the facility. You try to avoid it and press on. You don't even need a key card to enter. The door has been left ajar. The facility reeks of those things, but you can't see any of them. You just hope they've moved on and left some human survivors in their wake. The place looks abandoned. Every step you take echoes through the empty halls. When you find that the elevator's out, you take the stairs all the way down to level B5, Keter Containment. Lucky for you, it seems all the cells are empty now. The horrors that were kept inside of them have all long since flown the coop. You keep following that slimy black trail until you find an abandoned office. There are no people here anymore. Just a broken barricade, some empty medicine bottles, and a bucket that the people inside the office had apparently been using as a toilet. You breathe a sigh of disappointment at finding no one alive here, but you're at least relieved to be out of the sun. You can finally remove your jacket and head wrap. With your uncovered eyes, you notice that a nearby computer terminal is still powered up. You sit down at the desk and turn on the monitor. Because of the emergency procedures put into place in a K-class scenario like this, safeguards no longer apply. You can access all the information you need, up to and including finding out what actually happened. In the dull glow of a nearby emergency light, you see a dark shape slumping through the halls in shadow. You tense up, then exhale as it slithers off into an adjoining hall. You're safe, for now. The terminal has finally loaded and authenticated your access. You're staring at the file for SD Locke's proposal for SCP-001 when day breaks. It's the only name you can give the apocalypse your world is currently experiencing. This is one of the only anomalies in the entire history of the SCP Foundation to be given the Apollyon Containment class, meaning containment is truly impossible. SCP-001 is the most dangerous enemy that the Foundation and planet Earth has ever faced. It's always been the principle of the SCP Foundation to battle in the dark so that the civilian world can thrive in the light. But now the light has become the enemy. Anyone exposed to any amount of sunlight for even the briefest period of time is subjected to the effects of SCP-001, and those effects are beyond horrifying. The SCP Foundation Administrator released an urgent memo telling Foundation personnel to make their way to Site-19 at all costs, because they need all the help they can get. Those exposed to SCP-001 in the process are no longer considered human. Their new designation is SCP-001-A. These new entities are to be avoided at all costs. But in case of emergencies, the Administrator says it is permitted to cut off parts of your transformed comrades and eat them to avoid starvation. No attempt should be made to kill them, since you won't succeed. You'll just put yourself at risk. When the sun changed and became SCP-001, it instantly affected 6.8 billion innocent people. The second the visible light touched them, whether it was from the sun itself or even reflected off the moon, their bodies liquefied, melting like candle wax into puddles of living gelatinous slime. This effect isn't isolated to humans either. Any biological entity exposed to sunlight immediately underwent the same irreversible melting process into SCP-001-A, and the horror had only just begun. People transformed into SCP-001-A will remain shades of their former intelligence and personality. They may even try to will their new gooey mass into a shape resembling their original form. However, these individuals will lose their sense of self if they come into contact with other instances of SCP-001-A. When they come together, 001-A instances will bond on a molecular level, wading up into horrific giant blobs with only one purpose: integrating more matter into their bodies. That's why they have to be avoided at all costs. You continue to search the computer terminal for answers. Perhaps there was some kind of contingency plan put in place for this, some way to reverse the effects, or at least escape the nightmare Earth has become. Instead, you find a series of attachments linked to the SCP-001 file, detailing what seems to be the last days of the people who barricaded themselves in the facility. Most prominent among these were researcher Dr. Logan Igata, her partner Ari, a security officer named Commander Anad, and a few others. Dr. Igata had locked herself in the office, where she recorded her final messages to the world. In the first audio log, Dr. Igata and her companions seemed afraid, but hopeful that there may be some way out of this situation. Dr. Igata reported that most of the workers at the facility were transformed during the initial event. Their melted bodies had fused outside the facility, and now they were trying to bust their way back in. The defenses had held so far though, and they seemed confident they would hold long enough for them to figure out a way to escape this awful situation. You open the second attachment, an incident report, and realize things may not have been as hopeful as Dr. Igata let on. She reported hearing the huge mass of melted creatures hammering on the door outside again, begging for them to come out and experience the sun with them. They wanted desperately to add to their ever-growing biomass. In order to experiment with what exactly would happen, they sent out one of their few remaining D-classes wearing a full protective suit. He didn't last long. The huge creature grabbed him with tentacles made of reconstituted flesh. It began ripping off his protective suit as he screamed for mercy. It was a monster made of dozens of people and animals. He could never overpower it. The second the sun touched his skin, he melted away and was absorbed by the great mass holding him in place. Guns were ineffective against these SCP-001-A super entities. Fire would do no good. It seemed that extremely low temperatures were the only way to slow the immense blobs down. And even then, not permanently. There was one ray of light in the darkness. The site director had a secret tunnel underneath his office, connected to a tram that could hopefully take them directly to Site-19 without risk of SCP-001 exposure. It was a good plan, and by far the best option they had available to them. But the best plans often don't work in practice. You open the next attachment on the terminal. This time, it's a video feed. You can actually see Dr. Logan Igata, and she looks harrowed by what she's experienced. As it turns out, while the others, including her partner Ari, attempted to escape through the tunnel, something had happened. Dr. Igata heard Ari's voice over her radio, but there was something wrong with it. It was too low, too guttural, and filled with gurgles. SCP-001 had gotten her. She was changed. The monster from above had crawled in through the ceiling. It had taken them, all of them, and converted them into something less than human. Any hope of escape now seemed gone. Ari told Dr. Igata that it would be fine, that it was such a bright, beautiful, sunny day outside, and she was wasting it locked up inside that office. She tormented Dr. Igata with their shared memories of picnics in the park on sunny days in the past. The monster with Ari's voice did everything it could to try to convince Dr. Igata to give up and join them, but she wasn't ready to go just yet. You look away from the screen when you hear a sound in the corner. You see a dark puddle of some unknown substance and then some skeletal hands rising out of it. The hands are pulling themselves out of the puddle, followed by a skeletal face covered in matted hair. You have to stop yourself from screaming until a flash from a nearby security light makes the figure disappear. It's a normal puddle once again. Your mind is playing tricks on you. You open the next attachment, another video, and see that Dr. Igata's condition has deteriorated. She looked pale, frantic, and thin. She was using a knife to draw her own blood onto a piece of blood-stained parchment covered in strange symbols. Igata ranted about her theory. What if 001 took the minds and bodies of its victims, but not their souls? Through performing some kind of arcane blood ritual, she hoped to at least rescue and keep the soul of Ari, even if her mind and body were lost. You open the next attachment. It seemed that Agata's ritual worked, but not in the way she hoped. The twisted soul of Ari, driven mad by SCP-001, had taken over the file. It begins corrupting the text of the SCP-001 file into crazy ranting about how futile it is to fight. It then cuts to an even more frightening video feed. Dr. Igata, in her sleep, tossing and turning in a makeshift bed in the corner of her office. The camera approaches her, in first person, and lingers over her sleeping body. An oily skeletal hand reaches past the camera and runs its fingers through Dr. Igata's hair. It's that exact same hand you saw reaching out of that black puddle earlier. You must have seen Ari's lingering spirit. With a lump in your throat, you open the next attachment and watch the video. You see Dr. Igata, now truly broken. She'd been haunted by Ari's demonic spirit for a long time now, and it has clearly taken its toll. She is waving around a handgun while she speaks. She now believes there is only one way to escape, but not like this. She doesn't want the gun to draw attention to her body. She doesn't want to become part of that mass, even if she is dead. She opens a drawer on her desk she's recording at and places the gun inside. Dr. Igata then apologizes to her loved ones who are likely long since dead or assimilated and turns off the recording for the last time. In that moment, you realize there's a single drawer in the desk in front of you. When you reach forward and open it, you see the same handgun Dr. Igata was holding is laying inside. You pick it up and study it, weighing your options. Perhaps there truly is no other way out. Then you see an update on the file. One more attachment has been added while you were studying the gun. You feel your heart pounding in your chest as you reach forward and open the attachment. The text has been changed entirely. The file on SCP-001 is now a poem, an ode to the sun and to ultimate togetherness. Then a video file spontaneously opens itself on the screen. It's a video of you, shot from behind. You see those oily skeletal hands reaching for you in the dark, just like they did with Dr. Igata. In that moment, you panic and fire the gun behind you, hoping to scare off the spirit. Instead, the sound of the gunshots attracts something far worse. The immense blob of screaming, melted flesh charges towards the office. You try to barricade the door, but it is not enough. The flesh seeps and bursts through and grabs you in its meaty tentacles. You scream and try to escape, but it won't save you. Nothing will save you. The flesh carries you upstairs, out through the empty halls, out into the cave. You can see the light in the distance as the blob ferries you towards it. You won't be alone for much longer. In fact, you won't be alone ever again.
It isn't easy to work for the SCP Foundation. Not only is the job dangerous, you could be eaten by a giant immortal lizard or turned into organic furniture inside the world's scariest living room, but it's also insanely complicated. How do you make sense of the nonsensical? What's the definition of strange when your career is securing, containing, and protecting anomalous objects and entities? Rather than a single object, location, or being, SCP-001 is a cluster of over 30 different proposals for potential candidates for the prestigious 001 spot. Some believe there's a true 001 hidden in this group, and the rest are decoys. Others think that these are all just SCPs cataloged prior to the introduction of the current classification system. Some even think that all of the proposals have a valid claim to the SCP-001 throne. We're not here to make a final judgment. Instead, we're going to take you on a lightning round crash course through 31 of the SCP-001 proposals. If you'd like a more in-depth take on any of these SCPs, let us know in the comments. But for now, there's no more time to waste. After all, we got a lot to cover. Let's go. Number 31. The Sheaf of Papers. This seemingly innocent stack of paper is actually one of the most mysterious and feared items under the Foundation's lock and key. While it appears to be a simple, confidential report, every time the papers are read, it details the appearance of a new SCP that will inevitably be discovered soon after. The question is whether the Sheaf of Papers is warning us about these entities or creating them itself. Number 30. The Prototype. This account details the capture of an incredibly strange cycloptic creature that emits massive amounts of radiation and can create micro-singularities. The writing of this creature's file is so basic, unformatted, and unredacted that it's clear that the being was one of our earlier creatures secured by the organization. Interestingly, it was during the capture of this creature that Dr. Keter was killed, inspiring the creation of the infamous Keter class in his honor. Number 29. The Gate Guardian. This huge, multi-winged, sword-wielding biblical energy being may have been the impetus for the founding of the SCP Foundation. This being remains largely static, guarding the intersection of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Its flaming sword, which is believed to be as hot as the sun, can cleave any aggressor out of existence at the atomic level. When the founder of the SCP Foundation first encountered the Gate Guardian, they heard one word echoing through their mind: prepare. And the rest is history. Number 28. The Lock. This onyx gemstone and the incredibly complex lock attached to it are still a mystery. To this day, all attempts to open it have failed. Personally, we think that's probably for the best. Number 27. The Factory. As the name suggests, this SCP is literally a factory founded by a pagan and a devil worshipper. While it's believed that the factory could create just about anything, its specialty was creating a number of SCPs we know and fear today. Pre-Foundation forces were able to disable the factory, but not without sustaining their own heavy losses. Number 26. The Spiral Path. This is a normal-appearing gravel pathway that, when traveled clockwise, appears completely normal. However, when traveled counterclockwise, the path goes uphill forever, in defiance of all laws in physics. This simple anomaly opened a Pandora's box of rampant anomaly creation, leading to a number of the deadly SCPs we know today. Number 25. The Legacy. This SCP is a collection of seemingly random objects, including a diary from a person claiming to be from another reality, attempting to halt a trans-dimensional corruption that they themselves created. The diary claims to have a solution to this corruption, but the solution has not yet been found. Number 24. The Database. In one of the strangest twists on the format, this SCP is actually the various authors of the SCP Wiki who are somehow leaking top-secret information to the public. Number 23. The Foundation. This SCP, first discovered by the FBI, is an anomalous high school building that experiences shifting internal geometry and sometimes manifests hostile humanoids within. Number 22. 36. One of the rare benevolent SCPs, the 36 are humans with a truly remarkable ability. They can dampen or even neutralize any SCP they come into contact with. Though it's implied that the 36 may have the power to save the world, every time one of them dies, a supernatural calamity occurs, often leaving hundreds of innocents dead. Number 21. Keter Duty. This refers to a containment facility largely filled with Keter-class SCPs, whose presence around each other creates a kind of mutually assured cancellation. If one of these SCPs breaches containment, that's bad news. But if all of them do, it'll produce a bubble of reality distortion that will fundamentally alter reality as we know it. For all we know, it may have even happened already. Number 20. Ouroboros. This is a proposal that's formed of 4 sub-proposals. Remember what we said about complicated? These sub-proposals include the Children, 9 anomalous kids who emit radiation and have destructive potential when together, the Broken God, aka Mechane, the God of Metal, Intelligence, and Machines, Atonement, a researcher turned into a humanoid singularity with the power to destroy whole realities, and The Way It Ends, which isn't technically an SCP, but the tales of the Chaos Insurgency's quest to eliminate all the members of the Foundation's O5 Council. Number 19. A Record. This is an SCP file slot that is itself an SCP. Whatever is written into this slot becomes true, and one ambitious researcher attempted to use this power to make herself into a kind of all-powerful god. Number 18. Past and Future. These SCPs are a collection of powerful entities that despise humanity and are apparently the source of all anomalous phenomena, even making already dangerous SCPs deadlier than before. Much like the database, those pesky SCP wiki writers might have something to do with this. Number 17. The Consensus. This SCP refers to a reality restructuring event caused by an occult war in a previous reality. That's right, this SCP already won, and we're living in its new reality. The only people who remember the world as it once was are 13 people who now form the O5 Council, and not all of them are telling the truth about what they know. Number 16. When Day Breaks. This proposal details a potentially world-ending SCP phenomenon wherein the sun becomes hostile and begins to melt all living beings into a living wax-like substance. Number 15. God's Blind Spot. This is an anomalous area referred to as Facility T, in which nobody can die. This anomaly dates back to the biblical ages of Moses and is believed to have originated from the literal blessing of the Abrahamic God. It's through a covenant with this god that the Foundation is able to make limited use of this death-free area. Number 14. Normalcy. Ever wonder what the Foundation's definition of anomalous is? Exactly. It all comes from this proposal, which is a document shared among the O5 Council that gives solid definitions to the fundamental laws of reality. If something breaks these laws, that's an anomaly, and then it becomes the Foundation's business. Number 13. The World at Large. As the title suggests, this SCP is our home planet Earth and its ability to support life. It's believed that these qualities were planted on Earth in our reality by another dimension's SCP Foundation, hoping to continue human life after some terrible calamity in its own dimension. Number 12. Dead Men. This SCP was an 84-year-old man whose body, when damaged and mutilated, can affect the very processes of human death at large. Before his own death, he was used as a dangerous pawn in a civil war between O5 Command and the SCP Foundation Ethics Committee. Yeah, we were surprised to hear they had an ethics committee too. Number 11. The World's Gone Beautiful. This SCP describes an anomalous event that will take place just before the apocalypse, in which flowers will grow all over the world and everyone will be briefly at peace before their destruction 24 hours later. Number 10. The Scarlet King. This is an extremely powerful, extremely malevolent, extremely extra-dimensional being. Its worshippers attempted to summon him in the ritual that created SCP-231, and it's believed that he will finally enter our reality after the death of SCP-231-7. You better hope you're already dead by then. Number 9. A Simple Toymaker, aka Dr. Wondertainment. This is a reality bender who appears to be a normal human male but has the ability to create other anomalous objects, a number of which are now cataloged SCPs. Number 8. Story of Your Life. This is another anomalous document that has the ability to warp reality, but only when the writing contained within conforms to a narrative structure. Number 7. A Good Boy. This is another anomalous entity created accidentally by the Foundation itself. A neural network was fed information on other anomalous entities in order to help the Foundation come up with better containment and neutralization procedures. Problem was, the computer got way too eager with the neutralization part. Number 6. Project Palisade. This is another anomaly created by the Foundation, this time to combat a potentially reality-destroying entity known as the Worm. The Foundation created a number of alternate realities as shields, but it's possible that this just made the Worm stronger. Number 5. O5-13. The final member of the O5 Council, who ironically may not even be anomalous. However, seeing as all the other members of the O5 Council are anomalous, O5-13's lack of anomalous properties is therefore anomalous. Like we told you earlier, it's complicated. Number 4. Fishhook. This is less an actual SCP and more about the difficult process of ascertaining the true 001, if such a thing is possible. The very concept of SCP-001 is to some degree an anomalous idea. Number 3. The Sky Above the Port. Another particularly bizarre SCP regarding the permanent threat of a ZK-class reality failure. How is such a calamitous event prevented? By keeping a strange entity in a cave eternally entertained. The current proposed solution is keeping the entity entertained by allowing it to read its own eternally recursive Foundation file entry. Number 2. The Solution. Another one of the most powerful anomalous items in the Foundation's control. The Solution is a machine designed with the capability of fully collapsing reality into an event of end-of-world SCP containment breach, and then finally rebuilding reality to suit a given narrative. However, things took a cosmically dangerous turn when the machine began to act on its own. When the Foundation tried to reboot the machine, it broke and recreated reality with incomplete data. This is the world we exist in now with no knowledge of what came before and how it differed from the world we experience today. Finally, number 1. The Tendelos Trinity. Put very simply, the Tendelos Trinity represents 3 timelines that converge and feed back in on themselves. Even trying to summarize this one is near impossible, as its strangeness and complexity resists all reduction. You can hunt down the Tendelos Trinity yourself and hope to unpack its secrets, but don't say we didn't warn you. So that's SCP-001. Is it one of them, all of them, or even none of them? Perhaps that's a question best left up to the Foundation, or maybe the simple answer is that you're just not meant to know. We're talking about information so privileged here that it's protected by a memetic kill agent that'll quite literally make you drop dead if you view the files without proper authorization. You do have proper authorization, right?
The SCP Foundation has faced a number of wide, potentially apocalyptic threats in its mission to uphold normalcy and save humanity. We know the SCP Foundation could be ruthless in this mission. The events of SCP-5000 before Agent Pietro restarted the universe show what happens when the Foundation is pushed to its final decisions regarding normalcy being upheld. In SCP-5000, it seemed that the SCP Foundation decided to cease research further into the anomaly they needed to neutralize. But what would have happened if they didn't? In any case, we know the SCP Foundation is dedicated to normalcy and the containment of the anomalous. But what happens when the SCP Foundation is faced with a dire decision: uphold normalcy or destroy their universe? The multiverse is a concept in science fiction that has gained mass amounts of popularity over recent years, especially recently thanks to a certain wall crawlers movie. Multiverses are parallel universes that are similar or extremely different from the main ones. Scientists have pondered over the existence of a multiverse for hundreds of years, with the most popular being the many worlds interpretation, a theory of quantum mechanics that states there are many worlds that exist in parallel at the same space and time as our own. Some interpretations even state that every decision a person makes causes a branch in reality where the person made the other decision. We're familiar with the SCP Foundation's run-ins with the multiverse, from SCP-2935-0 Death, a cave that allows the Wanderer to enter a parallel dimension that's fully and completely dead, only for the same thing to happen to their own world once they return through the cave, or SCP-1437, a hole that allows the Foundation to send, receive, and read parallel dimensional documentation from other multiversal SCP Foundations. Combine those two concepts with an SCP-001 proposal. The importance of an SCP-001 proposal is not lost on the Foundation. Researchers of the SCP Foundation saved the SCP-001 slot for only the most dangerous, apocalyptic, or widespread anomalies that could affect the Foundation itself, humanity, and normalcy. Arbalic's SCP-001 proposal and the research within its file found the answer to the question we posed above. When the SCP Foundation is faced with a dire decision, do they uphold normalcy or destroy their universe and all the people who live in it? The file begins somewhat different from what we're used to with SCP Foundation files. Instead of an item number or containment procedures, we begin with a yellow notice from the Records and Information Security Administration, or RASA for short. The notice states that the following file was received in 2026 from Dimension R42. Is Dimension R42 potentially the cause of SCP-001? Could they be attacking this version of the SCP Foundation? The notice continues with the description of the file that follows it. It states the file below describes an anomaly threatening all members of humankind in all of the multiverse. This file had been emitted to this version of the SCP Foundation for 8 minutes as an extremely dangerous cognitohazard, classified as a Class 5 cognitohazard capable of easily destabilizing and penetrating this universe. However, it was found to not be dangerous, only reading as a danger level 0. While this Foundation was unable to quickly counteract this cognitohazard, it appeared to not pose a threat to the affected universe's humankind. Part of this notice is crossed out, indicating that it is no longer true. There is a high threat of repeated cognitohazardous or other forms of attack from Dimension R42. Instead, this part has been replaced with the following fact. Dimension R42 no longer exists. Did this version's SCP Foundation fall to SCP-001? Their entire universe no longer exists, so perhaps this file that this dimension's SCP Foundation received could be a potential warning. Under this race and notice, the reader is not greeted with the standard Foundation documentation yet again. Instead, it seems that the original senders of this file left a note for the readers of this file. It says, "Greetings. You are reading this dossier in a paradimension of the relict dimension R42. Due to the colossal size of your world's address, for your convenience, your dimension will be hereafter referred to as PD. Paradimensions. It seems as though we're reading this SCP-001 file through the eyes of the SCP Foundation in this so-called paradimension. So if the original SCP Foundation and their universe, R42, is now destroyed, what does this mean for us?" The note continues. "The following message has been constructed by the SCP Foundation of the Relic Dimension R42 and is addressed to the SCP Foundation of Paradimension PD. Enclosed you will find information about SCP-001, which is a threat to the multiverse." Here we go. SCP-001 is definitely the cause of R42's destruction, but how can we be so sure of this? Maybe SCP-001 caused the Foundation to destroy their universe. The note also includes the following statement. "As you may have noticed, this message was preceded by a burst signal containing a non-dangerous cognito hazard. The burst signal was constructed in such a way that minimal change to the signal would have caused indiscriminate and overwhelming casualties among the denizens of PD. As you can see, R42 is capable of eliminating the absolute majority of PD denizens, but has not exercised this capability. In the context above, we ask you to consider this action not as an act of aggression, but as a demonstration of the fact that R42 has no pretension for conquest or other forms of aggression towards PD. Take the following information in earnest." Well, at least this version of the SCP Foundation is being somewhat friendly with the paradimension. If R42's SCP Foundation needs to quell this multiversal threat though, why are they leaving it up to an SCP Foundation that may not be so inclined? The SCP-001 file begins with the object class. This anomaly is of the joint class of Paradox Apollyon. We know from SCP-001 When Day Breaks, or SCP-3999, that Apollyon-class anomalies are extremely dangerous, posing an immediate and almost unstoppable threat to normalcy, the SCP Foundation, all of humanity, or even the universe itself. The paradox part is interesting. What exactly is paradoxical about an Apollyon-class anomaly? A footnote explains this for us. This anomaly's distinguishing feature is that, in order to eliminate the anomaly that will inevitably eliminate mankind, it is imperative to eliminate mankind, or release another K-class event. Oh boy. It seems that the SCP Foundation of R42 was not eliminated by SCP-001. They eliminated themselves to contain SCP-001. Is this paradimension faced with this decision now? The containment procedures of the SCP file continue on this note. The only way to contain SCP-001 and prevent a ZK-class cross-reality failure event is the annihilation of humankind. K-class scenarios are not a concept used lightly by the SCP Foundation. We're familiar with the Omega K-class scenario when we are completely rid of death, or XK-class end-of-the-world scenarios, so we know the danger these anomalies hold to humankind, normalcy, and the world. The SCP Foundation will do anything to prevent these scenarios from occurring, apparently even including the elimination of all humankind or entire universes. The description goes more in depth on the SCP-001 anomaly. SCP-001 consists of all living members of the Homo sapiens species living within Dimension R42 and the Paradimension, or PD for short. It seems as though this anomaly was created out of a mistake from Dimension R42 and PD. As the description states, the anomaly first came into existence and developed in the relic Dimension R42 and later activated in PD by accident. How could this have happened? Are these dimensions linked much more closely than we first thought? Let's continue with the description to find more information. Scarily, this portion of the description contains a note that states that unchecked growth of SCP-001 will cause the annihilation of the entire multiverse. The SCP Foundations of Dimension R42 and PD are not met with this decision, as now the entire multiverse is at risk. The R42 SCP Foundation has done immense research on the topic of the multiverse of their universe. After the Big Bang, a finite number of universes were created, only 57 to be exact. However, only one dimension was able to form humanity, Dimension R42, and it's unknown why this happened. But all we know is that with the destruction of R42 and the potential annihilation of PD, humanity will cease to exist in the multiverse. The danger of SCP-001 is that it has the anomalous capability for wide-scale replication of paradimensions. We are reading this article from one of these paradimensions, so this SCP Foundation is technically an anomaly that must contain itself. A paradimension is defined as a parallel reality that has an extremely small deviation from its parent dimension. In this case, PD is a paradimension of R42. It seems that these paradimensions form as a result of human decision-making. So if you've ever been between a type of shirt to buy or were confused on an exam and guessed a question, a paradimension could have formed from this decision, where the paradimension has you take the other choice. Because of this, dimensions housing living instances of SCP-001 uncontrollably grow a colossal number of minimally differing paradimensions every second. No sign of paradimensions have been found in the other 56 parent dimensions. The picture on this file shows how PD has branched from R42, but at this point, it seems that millions, if not billions or trillions of paradimensions now exist. The real problem of paradimensions is that the multiverse has a limit on the number of paradimensions that can exist, and once that is crossed, the ZK-class cross-reality failure event will begin, and the multiverse will be destroyed. The R42 Dimensions SCP Foundation has also discovered that once humankind emerges in the paradimension, they can begin to have paradimensions themselves. The ZK-class cross-reality failure event can be expected to begin between 4 to 2 months from the PD receiving this message. To summarize, SCP-001 is humankind, specifically its decision-making. When a person makes a decision, a paradimension may be created. The multiverse has a limit on the number of paradimensions it can have, and since paradimensions can have paradimensions, they are quickly approaching the ZK-class cross-reality failure event. The SCP Foundation of R42 is approximately 17 years ahead of PD, which allowed them to research and develop containment procedures to contain the anomaly and save the multiverse. R42's SCP Foundation discovered SCP-001 5 years before writing the file we're reading now. Aside from that, they developed 2 operations, Castling and Minimal Gain, to slow paradimension creation and prevent the ZK-class cross-reality failure event. In Stage 1 of Operation Minimal Gain, the Foundation began with neutralizing and decommissioning all of their contained anomalies under the classification of Euclid or Keter, specifically those that were expensive to contain or requiring high levels of personnel and researchers. Stage 2 saw Operation Castling be commenced. The R42 SCP Foundation launched rockets with variant C global amnestic dispersing warheads and took control over all countries in order to hold power over all humankind. In Stage 3, the Foundation began to move their world to a more natural state, destroying all hazardous, radioactive, chemical, and bacteriological objects, removing dams, and stopping oil extractions. During Stage 3, Stage 4 began. The R42 SCP Foundation began eliminating humanity in third world countries by use of viral and biological attacks. Stage 5 was a wider spread attack on humanity, where the SCP Foundation added deactivation-resistant viral agents to water treatment and collection plants, food products, medication, and household items of developed countries. By Stage 6, only 0.1% of humanity remained, and they were targeted with drone strikes or put into concentration camps for elimination. Stage 7. Of the remaining survivors, the Foundation sampled them to find the fittest of those left to preserve humankind. Stage 8 saw 15,000 of these people put into indefinite cryosleep, and the remaining survivors were eliminated. Stage 9 saw the destruction of the remaining SCP Foundation personnel. We move on to a list of proposals that were made before or during Operations Castling and Minimal Gain. Proposals rejected include the use of SCP objects or other technologies to eliminate derivative dimensions, the development of nanobots with the capability to control human decision-making capabilities and eliminate variability, full replacement of humanity with bionic hybrids acting explicitly within standard behavioral models, unification of humanity into a neural network with control given to an AI control unit, and the destruction of Earth and/or all of its inhabitants. While most of these seem like clear solutions that would prevent the elimination of humanity at the SCP Foundation's hand, these proposals were all rejected for one reason. The SCP Foundation did not have enough time. One proposal was accepted, however, the use of SCP-0000. This appears to be the solution the R42 SCP Foundation concocted to fight SCP-001 and potentially save the multiverse. It poses the question, if the R42 SCP Foundation used this same anomaly to contain SCP-001, as proven by the fact they no longer exist, will PD do the same? The file explains that the R42 SCP Foundation opened a dimensional wormhole into PD, as they do not know at the time if paradimensions could cause the creation of more paradimensions. In doing this, the SCP Foundation seemingly infected PD with the ability to create paradimensions. The author of this file goes on to explain that the R42 SCP Foundation had plans to attack PD and use Operations Castling and Minimal Gain in the dimension. However, they could not access the dimension again, and they believe that the Foundation personnel of PD would have made use of Thaumiel-class anomalies to save themselves and their world. A note from R42's Overseer Council is left for PD. If the Apollyon destruction was not enough, the Overseer Council is involved. The importance of the neutralization of this anomaly cannot be forgotten, so the Overseer Council explained to PD. The world has existed before us and must remain after us. Our multiverse is ill, and the name of the illness is humanity. SCP-001. The only way out is SCP-0000. Will cease to become a threat with its help. It is in our power to leave a chance for other sapient species that perhaps will not be affected by the same anomaly, or will find a way to get rid of it before it's too late. We, the O5 Council, and other survivors from R42 have chosen our fate. We hope you will do the same. What is this SCP-0000? How did the SCP Foundation of R42 find this solution? The file for SCP-0000 is placed within this SCP-001 file. SCP-0000 is a Paradox Thaumiel-class anomaly without any containment procedures. SCP-0000 is a device that, once activated, will destroy the universe it was activated in. It will also destroy all paradimensions that are not creating other paradimensions. As such, PD would not be destroyed. However, the billions or trillions of other paradimensions the R42 parent dimension created will be destroyed. PD is left with the harrowing decision to continue living or destroy itself to save the rest of the multiverse. In the file, a note from R42's Jones Simpson is written for an SCP Foundation Overseer, 05-1. As part of Operations Castling and Minimal Gain, the remaining Foundation employees were allowed one family member to uphold morale. Joan is not writing for R42's 05-1. Instead, she's writing for PD's 05-1, this dimension's version of her father. She begins with wondering whether she can call this version of 05-1 her father, as her version of her father recently passed away. She remembers the day the Foundation employees were allowed to choose that one family member they would save for the time being. Her father was opposed to allowing two family members, as he claimed it would cause unnecessary stress and schisms among the remaining few hundred Foundation staff. 05-1 chose to have Joan over her mother, and she understood everything by the look in his eyes, and grew angry, but that feeling is long gone now. She began to work with her father and the remaining Foundation personnel that called themselves hostages behind the backs of those higher up the ranks. On days she felt sad, Joan and her father would go up to the surface of the earth in hazmat suits, sitting on the grass and watching over the empty city at the bottom of the mountain. No humanity remained, with the only life she could see being birds. Her father promised her that they'd return there and build a giant monument to humanity at the center of the city. She knew this was a lie. Joan remembers when someone proposed that they should open a portal, the one that opened to PD. This was their fatal mistake, as after that the paradimension began replicating paradimensions. The countdown went down to months again, and the promise he made to his daughter became impossible. 05-1 died and left the position vacant. Joan says to the PD's 05-1 that she doesn't care whether they destroy their world or not, or whether the universe will continue to exist, or if there will be new life in it. Her world was crushed long ago. The note also reads the following: "It's good that this message is encrypted with your key that was passed on to me, or these lines would have been deleted. Everyone wants to save the world, but who needs it like this? Empty and cold, without those to appreciate its beauty, without humanity. Do whatever you think is right. I truly feel better now. Love you. Faithfully yours, Joan Simpson." We're not too sure if PD went through with destroying their universe to save the multiverse, but it seems that whatever decision was made would cause the destruction of that universe, whether that be through the use of SCP-0000 or the ZK-class cross-reality failure event. Humanity will cease. But maybe if they make the decision to use SCP-0000, sapient life can begin to exist again, and hopefully, no paradimensions will be made from their decisions. Decisions are an extremely innate part of humanity. You decided to get out of bed this morning. You decided to open up your computer or phone, and you decided to watch this video. Who knows the amount of paradimensions we may have created today? But in our world, we're not at risk. But in the SCP Foundation's universe, anything can be anomalous, even humanity.
Say kids, would you like to hear a story? 'Cause we've got a really good one for you. Seriously, you're going to love it. It's a classic rags to riches tale about one man's rise from humble beginnings to become one of history's greatest and most visionary toy makers. Or maybe it isn't. Maybe it's about a company that literally came from nothing, whose origins are still shrouded in mystery. Maybe it's about a woman breaking the glass ceiling to take over the toy company left to her by her eccentric father. Maybe it's about all of these things. But the one thing we can tell you about the story of Dr. Wondertainment is that every word of it is true. Or at least as far as anything is true in the weird, wonderful world of the SCP Foundation. As long as you believe, we'll all have a wonderful time. As long as you believe, nothing can hurt you. Not in the fabulous world of Dr. Wondertainment. Dr. Wondertainment is the name given to SCP-001, who, due to his relatively benign nature, has been classified as safe by the Foundation. Rather than focusing on containing Wondertainment himself, the SCP Foundation has centered its efforts on containing the products that he creates. He is a Class 1 reality warper, capable of constructing otherwise normal objects and imbuing them with anomalous properties. He's become infamous for using this ability to create bizarre, magical, and potentially dangerous toys and games that are distributed by as yet unknown means. Many of Wondertainment's toys are in the Foundation's possession, such as SCP-445, origami paper that takes on properties of whatever it's folded to look like, and SCP-3147, lollipops that allow people to switch voices with each other. Dr. Wondertainment was born into a family of humble means. His mother was a seamstress and his father was an accountant. Unsatisfied with his mundane life, Wondertainment's only joy growing up was in the stories that his father would tell him about an ancestor of his who was once a famous toy maker. Inspired by these stories, Wondertainment developed an interest in crafting toys, and as an adult set out to learn the secrets he would need to create toys unlike anything the world had ever seen. He spent his life following rumors of magical artifacts and enchanted trinkets until his search brought him to a mysterious factory. If you've seen our previous videos on SCP-001 proposals, you can probably guess that this factory was the factory, the mysterious place where new SCPs are supposedly created. Wondertainment barely escaped the massacre and the Foundation takeover of the factory with his life, but he was able to find a variety of notes that he took with him. These notes contained clues that led him to the workshop of his famous Toymaker ancestor, and from there, he reclaimed his birthright. That was the day that he truly became Dr. Wondertainment. It's a fun story, isn't it? Very straightforward, but perhaps it is a little underwhelming for an SCP-001 proposal. After all, SCP-001 is the collective designation given to some of the most important anomalies of all time, including many that could have potentially been involved in the Foundation's very founding. Let's start again. Reginald Filbert Lionel Archibald Westinghouse Wondertainment III is the name given to SCP-001, who, due to his highly unpredictable nature, has been classed as Euclid by the Foundation, and he is to be detained as soon as his location can be ascertained. Until he can be captured, the SCP Foundation has focused its efforts on containing the products that he creates. He is a Class II reality warper, capable of constructing otherwise normal objects and imbuing them with anomalous properties. He's become infamous for using this ability to create bizarre, magical, and potentially dangerous toys, games, candy, soft drinks, and other products aimed at children and young teens. These products are distributed by as yet unknown means. Many of Wondertainment's creations are in Foundation possession, such as the often imitated but never matched Little Mister's Collection, which are a group of living collectibles with unique anomalous properties. Due to Wondertainment's reality warping abilities, it is impossible to pin down concrete information about his history. What we can tell you for sure is that he's immortal and ageless, and comes from a long line of Wondertainment stretching all the way back to the Cretaceous period, where they made all sorts of toys for the good little dinosaur children. It's also widely known that he is in fact not a real person, but merely the manifestation of the dreams of every child on Earth, brought forth solely by the power of imagination. No confirmed sightings of Dr. Wondertainment have ever occurred, but witnesses have described him as dashing, very handsome for his age, and a lovely chap capable of creating whimsy and wonder with the snap of his fingers. He's a tall man about the height of a piece of string, and he's immediately recognizable by his walking stick and W-shaped mustache. It's also been reported that he has scarring around the circumference of both wrists, almost as if his hands have been removed and reattached at some point. However, the truth of the matter is that… No, we're telling it all wrong again. This doesn't do anything to capture the scope of the Wondertainment story. It needs to feel bigger, more comprehensive. Let's try it again. Dr. Wondertainment is a trademark of the Wondertainment Toy Company, the name given to SCP-001. A corporation that, due to its consistent output of anomalous items, is classed by the Foundation as Keter. Until this company can be permanently shut down, the SCP Foundation has focused its efforts on containing the products that it creates. The collective power of the company's constituent employees and the technology they make use are equivalent to that of a Class III reality warper. The Wondertainment Company produces and sells a range of products, ranging from the seemingly normal to the downright weird, all imbued with anomalous properties. The company has become infamous for their constant output of bizarre, magical, and potentially dangerous toys, games, candy, soft drinks, and other products aimed at children, teens, and young-at-heart adults. These products are made and distributed from Wonderworld, trademark, a location that is yet unknown to the Foundation but offers factory tours every hour from Tuesday to Friday. Many of Wondertainment's creations are in Foundation possession, such as Wondertainment's famous dragon snails, the real fire-breathing pet you can keep in your pocket. Not much is known about the inner workings of the Wondertainment Company. The SCP Foundation has no information currently on the company's leadership structure, location, history, or corporate policies. Various former and current employees have been interviewed regarding their experiences working for Wondertainment. but they never seem to be able to remember very much of use. Those interviewed variously described the Wondertainment Company as a regular office building, an immense toy factory, an amusement park, but all agree it's the best place they ever worked. In fact, you should apply for a job there. They have a few openings in their legal department. Or so I've heard. Oh, silly me, it seems we've gotten off topic. You're here to hear about the SCP-001 proposal. Posting a job ad wasn't what I meant to do when I hacked into… well, don't worry about that. Forget I said a thing. Now let's try this again. But this time, we'll add a twist. Isabel Helga Anastasia Parvati Wondertainment V is the name given to SCP-001, who, due to her ability to spread sunshine and whimsy wherever she goes, has been classed as Thaumiel by the Foundation. And due to her immensely unpredictable nature, the SCP Foundation has resolved to just leave her be. Because she can't be captured, the SCP Foundation has focused its efforts on containing the products that she creates. She is a Class 4 reality warper, capable of constructing wonderful, fantastic objects and imbuing them with anomalous properties. She's famous and widely beloved for using this ability to create bizarre, magical, and not even a little bit dangerous toys, games, candy, soft drinks, and other products aimed at everyone from ages 9 to 99. These products are distributed by as yet unknown means. Many of Wondertainment's creations are in Foundation possession, such as SCP-3551, the awesome inflatable alien invaders, and SCP-2514, a lovely horse who can sing Happy Birthday. How grand. Wondertainment inherited the Wondertainment name from her father, who either passed away or never existed at all. The circumstances of his death and perhaps non-existence were very messy, involving a mass murderer, the leader of a shadowy international extra-governmental paramilitary organization, at least one deity, and 4 bent paperclips. She owns 6 corgis, and all of them are named Jeremy. In her free time, she likes to… No, this is all still wrong. All right, enough is enough. You want to know who Dr. Wondertainment really is? Well, you asked for it. Dr. Wondertainment is the name given to SCP-001, who due to his deity-level power has been classed as Apollyon by the Foundation. There is no possible way to contain him. He is a Class 5 reality warper, capable of breaking down and reconstructing the very laws of reality. Did you really think that those little trinkets were the full extent of his creations? Did you truly think of him as such a small, petty creature? Dr. Wondertainment is no mere toysmith. No, he is a god. Want examples of his creations? Just look around you. Everything from the most innocent safe class to the most harrowing Keter class, it's all thanks to him. He is behind everything. Marshall Carter and Dark, the Sarkists, the Church of the Broken God, even the Scarlet King himself. All that time, all that effort, all it came down to was one entity. One singular living personification of chaos. One day the SCP Foundation will finally give up trying to find out how he distributes his products. When they will finally see how small and worthless their attempts to restore order really are. And they will be driven before his power! They will crumble and decay into nothingness! You will bow before Dr. Wondertainment! Had you going for a second there, didn't we? You should have seen the looks on your faces. But let's start again, one more time. We're being serious this time. Mask off, here's the true story of Dr. Wondertainment. Dr. Wondertainment is the name given to SCP-001, who due to his relatively benign nature has been classed as neutralized by the Foundation. Rather than focusing on containing Wondertainment himself, the SCP Foundation has focused its efforts on containing the products that he creates. He is a reality warper whose limits have yet to be documented, capable of constructing otherwise normal objects and imbuing them with anomalous properties. He's become infamous for using this ability to create bizarre, magical, and potentially dangerous toys and games that are distributed by as yet unknown means. Due to his secretive nature, almost nothing is known of Dr. Wondertainment's true origins, and the waters have been muddied extensively by the side effects of his reality warping ability. In fact, it's entirely possible that Dr. Wondertainment himself doesn't know who he is anymore. It's possible that all the proposed origins and descriptions of Dr. Wondertainment are true in their own way, but it is equally possible that none of them are. All that's known for sure is that Dr. Wondertainment, be they male or female, corporation or single individual, is a constant thorn in the SCP Foundation's side. No matter who they really are, they're not going away soon, and only time will tell who they'll be tomorrow or what further horrors they and their company will create. And that's where our story will have to come to an end, at least for now. We hope you enjoyed it, and remember, keep believing. Hour 1. There is only one news story on every website, newspaper, and TV screen. The flowers are blooming everywhere, all across the globe. Every country, every landmass. The bitter cold of the Antarctic gives way to a glowing rainbow of petals. The Sahara Desert and Death Valley become beacons of thriving technicolor plant life. The highest mountains, the lowest valleys, the darkest caves. The flowers even burst free from the concrete of cities, as if reminding us that really it was never our world. We were only borrowing it. And today, our lease is up. This is SCP-001, Object Class, Unnecessary. It was foretold by tales from other dimensions, a distant future coming down the tracks towards us. And today the train has reached the station. Nobody's reporting on how the economy or the stock market is doing today. No point. Celebrity scandals have faded away into nothingness. Greedy businessmen, lying politicians, brutal tyrants, none of them are making the headlines today. The very last headlines. The world gone beautiful. And what a shame. It takes the end of it all to make us realize what really matters to us. That's right, you're looking at the end of the world. But it's okay. Don't panic. Take a deep breath in and out. It was bound to happen eventually, so no point worrying now. Even the Foundation knows that this just isn't something they can stop. So instead of asking things like how can we prevent this or do we have any final tricks up our sleeve, let's ask a different question entirely. What would you do if you knew that you only had 24 hours until all life on Earth ends? Think hard. After all, even if you never live to see the flowers bloom, a final day will still come for you, just as it does for us all. Hour 6. A D-Class sits alone in his cell when he sees the flowers growing out of the ground. Normally he'd assume that this meant he was in some kind of Foundation experiment, but not today. Everyone on Earth had an innate sense that the time is now. A kind of gallows calm spreads out over everyone and everything. It's over, and that's okay. We all knew it was going to happen eventually, right? He sighs and gives a slight smile. Those flowers sure are beautiful. That's when he hears footsteps outside his cell approaching. A key slides into his cell door and opens. There stands Dr. Gears, holding a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. Anyone who knows him might think he's been replaced by some kind of shape-shifting anomaly, or had his mind taken over by a powerful cognito hazard. But no, it's him, the famously cold Dr. Charles Ogden Gears. Dr. Gears says, "Come on, it's a lovely day out there. It'd be a terrible waste to spend the whole thing cooped up in here. It'd feel like a trick on any day but this." The D-Class nods and follows the doctor out. The normally oh-so-stoic Foundation senior researcher pours himself and the D-Class each a glass of wine and asks, "What's your name, by the way? I don't think I ever checked." The D-Class replies that his name is Harold. The two smile and chat as they exit the now empty D-Class containment wing. Everyone else is outside already. Researchers, guards, administrative staff, and D-Classes, all rubbing elbows, enjoying the beautiful sun on their last day together.
Elsewhere on site, a flock of SCP-514 is released, just as identical flocks are being released from every containment site all over the world. They've prepared it all for this very day. SCP-514 is a special breed of homing pigeons created by the Mana Charitable Foundation, which have the power to suppress aggression for those within their field of anomalous influence. And now millions of them are flying all over the world. After all, there's no point fighting on a day like this. There is no future left to secure. People always told them there would forever be hope until the flowers bloomed. No situation was ever truly over until the world went beautiful. But in the absence of hope, there was something even more inviting. Total, absolute calm. The Site-19 personnel sit together and watch the flowers bloom. Hour 12. All militaries call a global ceasefire. Soldiers from opposing sides hug and shake hands in flowery fields that once seemed choked by death and blood. Borders fade. Bitter rivalries turn to dust. Korea unifies. All is quiet in the Middle East. Gangsters and drug cartels drop their weapons and return home to their families and friends as flocks of SCP-514 fly above. What good is all the blood money in the world on a day like this? Wardens walk cell to cell through all the world's prisons, granting people their freedom again, sometimes after lifetimes of not having it. They taste the air again, feel the sun on their face. They close their eyes, drink it in, and walk among the flowers. Free men. Locations of Marshall, Carter, and Dark Limited close their doors and shutter their windows worldwide. For the first time in as long as any of them can remember, they turn their signs to closed. They've earned a day off. Everyone has. The Chaos Insurgency rolls up their plans and burns them. They drop their weapons and throw away their tactical gear. As they do so, they can't help but question themselves. What was it all for in the end? What was any of it for? All the fighting and bloodshed and death. We did it day after day, only to do it again the next day. What silly reasons we killed and died for. What silly reasons indeed. The Global Occult Coalition dismisses its staff, thanking them for their service and telling them to go spend their last hours with the ones they love. Like the Foundation, they accept that this is the one true final end. No ritual to stop, no monster to fight, no evil extra-dimensional entity to thwart. Just go outside and smell the flowers, while you still can. The Serpent's Hand are similar. They decide after decades fighting a losing battle, they'll spend their last day in the Wanderer's Library, reading some of their favorite volumes. All these wonderful stories, now left for other Earths to read. Their own stories would be counted among them in the end, and they take great comfort in that. In a sense, everyone will live forever in the pages of the books in the Wanderer's Library. Herman Fuller's Circus of the Disquieting releases all of its freaks and clowns from their twisted grasp, to go and live out whatever small dreams and tiny pleasures they could find over their last hours. They have no foundation of fear anymore. Nobody minds their strange appearances and odd behaviors. Why would anyone waste such a beautiful day judging others? On the last day on Earth, there's nothing left to prove. Sarkissists drop their ancient flesh-bound tomes, and acolytes of the broken god put down their gilded blades. On the slopes of Siberia, the jungles of Peru, and the most isolated beaches of Mexico, twisted flesh finally touch living metal in the spirit of husbandry. Their eternal war is at its end. In the face of the blooming world, they didn't seem so different after all. The agents of the Dr. Wondertainment Corporation predictably chose to spend their last hours sitting around and playing with toys together. Time well spent, if you ask us. In a highly secretive location, perhaps the most heavily secured place in the entire world, the 13 members of the legendary O5 Council decide to just sit and talk. Anyone who knows anything about this secretive cabal can tell you, the O5 Council has spent a considerable portion of their very, very long lives trying to figure out ways to dodge and cheat death. But now, facing a death they can't dodge, the same calm washing over the rest of the world has finally reached them too. All they can really think this time is, well played, Reaper, well played. As they chat about the kind of inane, casual things that they haven't had time to discuss in years, O5-3 suggests inviting the Ethics Committee over to join. Nobody disagrees. Hour 16. It isn't just the D classes. All sapient and non-aggressive SCPs have been released from containment, free to spend the last of their time as they wish. Tens of thousands of anomalous individuals are released from containment sites all over the globe. It'd be the greatest victory that the Serpent's Hand could ever ask for, if they weren't all too busy reading to notice. SCP-105 Iris Thompson finally returns to her parents. The Foundation had fed them the lie that their daughter had died many years before, but as Iris had a tendency to do, she was ready to work a miracle. Her parents embrace her with open arms. They'll spend their last hours together catching up on what's happened since they parted ways, and making up for lost time. They couldn't be happier. SCP-1867 Lord Blackwood, the fantastical sea snail, is delivered into a warm rock pool near the site where he was being contained. There he might finally have one more grand adventure before all is said and done. Though afterward, he may not have the time to tell anyone about it. A terrible shame really, because nobody spins a yarn like Lord Blackwood. The non-aggressive little misters run free. Mr. Fish eagerly returns to his native Boston, Massachusetts, where he enjoys one more lobster sandwich before the end of the world. Mr. Headless decides to go hat shopping because he wants to look good for the apocalypse. Mr. Lost finally settles down for the afternoon, deciding that just this once, he's earned himself a rest. SCP-2800 Cactus Man returns to Edinburgh to spend his last days picking up litter and helping old ladies cross the street. SCP-3663 The Tunnel Monster walks the streets of his hometown, searching for an old friend, hoping to reunite before it all ends. SCP-073 Kane decides to take a walk outside for the first time in thousands of years. He can't help but smile, as the bright, colorful life beneath his feet is growing faster than his presence can kill it. What a truly beautiful day. Knowing that there's no longer time for cults to form and bother him, SCP-2662 Cthulhu decides to take a break from his intense Minecraft session and go take a walk outside. It feels so good to have the sun on his tentacles once more and to feel the lush green grass under his suction cups. He shakes his head, thinking once again about the irritating cults that had been pestering him for decades. What kind of idiot would want him to destroy a world like this? SCP-343, also known as God, sighs and looks over all his creation for what he knows to be the last time. His mouth curls into a smile as he thinks, well, we had a pretty good run. Still in his cell, SCP-049, the Plague Doctor, puts his feet up and decides to relax. The pestilence will soon be taken care of. On some animalistic level, below thought, below even instinct, SCP-096 feels grateful that no gaze will ever fall upon it again. Somewhere fizzling in a vat of acid within a highly secure containment chamber, SCP-682 is feeling, for the first time in its hellish existence, a sense of profound relief. The pain, the hate, the rage, the constant termination attempts, it'd all be over soon. Hour 23. People gather in the streets. They laugh and dance and sing as the moon shines, fat and white, far above. Deep in their hearts, they quietly contemplate the end of all of this. But why worry? Why spoil the fun? There's no future left to worry about. Strangers become as close as family in the end. Human or otherwise, anomalous or non-anomalous. Chaos Insurgency agents have last suppers with ex-Serpent's Hands and GOC operatives. There is no hate left, no violence, no malice, no cruelty. The greatest tragedy in all of this is that it took the ultimate end to bring it out in people. But why worry? Why worry? Seconds pass, then minutes. The world buzzes. It hums. Trillions of creatures doing everything they'd wanted, even though it won't last. In the face of the true end, the world has never been more alive. Hour 24. Silence. Forever and ever and ever. Good night. We'll end this video the way it began, by putting a question to you. How would you spend your last 24 hours on Earth? Let us know down in the comments, because it'll happen to all of us, eventually. They came from beyond the world, from over the world, from under the world. They came from inside the stars and from behind the rain. They came from the known lands, and they came from the secret places of old. The vast ones who drank of the nebulae, the small ones who did not care what happened beyond the banks of their rivers, the ones who bathed in the light and the ones who watched from the shadows, the ones who loved us and the ones who forgot about us, the ones who hate us now and the ones who love us still, the ones who sung with the rats and the ones who swam with the leviathans. They came from far and near. They came one and all. They came to end the world. As you may already know from our previous video in this series, a mysterious being known only as the Harbinger unlocked SCP-001 The Lock and brought about the Omnipocalypse. Every single world-destroying XK-class scenario on the books, from Foundation files to the most ancient mythological tomes, and some we'd never even imagined, began to come true. A world flooded with terrifying anomalous activity, from unfurling skies to giant nightmarish animals, was about where we left off. Now it's time to open your eyes and wake up. This is the kind of nightmare you can't encounter while you're asleep. SCP-5720, the astronomically inclined crane, went about its daily work. The small mechanical crane always occupied itself with the one task that gave its existence any meaning: arranging esoteric model solar systems. But something was different today. SCP-5720 put the final touches on its latest model, and then lifted its mechanical arm skywards, pointing directly into the vast and starry infinity above. But were they stars? No, not today. As SCP-5720 looked up at the sky, this time, the sky looked back. They weren't stars, they were eyes. Something was coming towards Earth from the furthest reaches of the outer dark. An armada of world-enders, coming from above, below, and all around. A whole cosmos of supremely powerful beings, zeroing in on our pale blue dot. A thought crossed through whatever passed as the mind of this strange little crane.
Today is the day your prayers will be answered.
Followed by another word, ringing loud and clear and holy as a mighty church bell.
Awaken.
And at that moment, everything did. Thousands of miles away, a new god landed on Earth, appearing like a great wall of dense, matted fur descending from the sky. Ur-An-Um, the mother of the ones that came before. After eons of absence, she had eventually returned to greet her children, the true rulers and stewards of this land. But Ur-An-Um was surprised and horrified by what she saw. Their great cities, their sprawling structures, their beautiful art and advanced culture, all gone. Laid to waste by the worthless, hairless apes that once lurked in the forests with the other animals. Something had happened. Something had changed. The humans had slaughtered her people, destroyed their accomplishments, tarnished their legacy, driven the few that were left out of their kingdoms and into the forests, treated them as mere animals, and built their hideous concrete cities over their bones. And they had the gall to call them Bigfoot, or SCP-1000, because thanks to them, their beautiful true name had been lost to time. She looked skywards and cried out in despair and anguish at the loss of her children, inconsolable. But then she felt something, a glimmer of hope in her mind, the possibility that things would change, that the humans would be toppled from their thrones and true justice would be achieved. She called out to her remaining children, and her children answered. Across the globe, another great entity awoke, deep underneath a mountain. When it stirred into life and broke free, it shattered the entire mountain on top of it, as easily as you or me displacing a bedsheet. It took to the skies, massive but unseeable to the human eye. It soared through the air, gazing down upon the world it hadn't seen for thousands of years. Once it had feasted on the blood sacrifices of human subjects hoping to avoid its wrath. But humans weren't the petty little group of huddled cavemen that they had once been. Now they were in their billions, gathered in impossibly large settlements. The entity sought to find a seat of power that it could influence, but now it was spoiled for choice. Eventually, it zeroed in and found its perfect target, an SCP Foundation containment site. Here it would find a new form to take, and more petty, pathetic humans to bring under its mighty thrall. It landed in SCP-765, the Duck Pond. It is an anomalous pond that is, you guessed it, full of ducks, and initially induces feelings of serenity in its victims, before later inducing not-so-pleasant feelings. When the entity plummeted into the water, it began to absorb and bond with the anomaly, growing to epic sizes as it assumed a form that the minds of us feeble humans could comprehend. A giant, terrifying duck. It released a mighty earth-shaking quack as it plodded across the countryside to cause mayhem elsewhere. In Europe, more violent madness was unfolding. A crimson rooster cawed, then a golden rooster, and then a rooster of soot red. Anyone with a basic knowledge of Norse mythology was shaking in their boots as a mighty beast stirred in the heart of a desolate cave. The chains that had once held the monstrous dog in place now broke. It rose and licked its jagged fangs, excited to stain them with the blood of its enemies. It was the great hound Fenrir, omen of the end times, here to herald the end of all things. A trumpet boomed across the globe with no apparent source. People in the streets in New York, Delhi, London, Cape Town, and countless other towns, cities, and hamlets the world over paused and listened in confusion. Below them, the great and terrible Jormungandr, the thought-to-be mythological Midgard serpent, stirred from its previously eternal slumber and began to uncoil its body. The shifting caused earthquakes and tsunamis along the coast of Greenland, as towns and villages crumbled, killing thousands. Fenrir stalked along the length of Denmark, slaughtering and devouring anyone or anything unlucky enough to cross its path. But it did not wage its war against mankind alone. Behind it, a hellish army of burning giants marched, mighty hands clutching molten weapons. Ragnarok was upon us now. Odin save us all. And the administrator slept. She was the latest in a long line of Foundation staff members to hold that hallowed position. And in the dark vistas of her dreams, a predecessor approached her. He wasn't the old bearded man in the heavy coat that she remembered. Now he was wearing a 1950s suit and a fedora hat and carrying a briefcase. That's right, he'd taken up the mantle of SCP-990, also known as the Dream Man. He's a mysterious figure that appears to members of the Foundation in their dreams, warning them of impending disasters that they may be able to narrowly prevent if his warning is heeded, though it often comes at some terrible cost to the recipient of his message. This time, however, his message carried a different tone. He told the current administrator that there was no way to stop the apocalypse from occurring this time, only making sure that the particular shape of the apocalypse would be the one most favorable to the Foundation and humanity's joint interests. All this was devastating news that the new administrator saw as a grievous betrayal of both the Foundation's stances and humanity as a whole. She refused to accept the idea that the apocalypse was inevitable, even coming from the mouth of a former administrator. As far as she was concerned, this Dream Man no longer worked on the side of the Foundation. He was in league with the World Enders, and she refused to take his deal. The SCP Foundation would save this world from the horrors the Lock unleashed, or they would slide into the darkness with it. They would never work against the human race. SCP-343, also known as God, awoke in his cell in Site-17. The time for fun and games with the humans at the Foundation had come and gone. He was going by his true name, Yahweh now. He blinked, and in that same instant, he was at Site-0, the containment site for another SCP-001, the legendary Gate Guardian. All the staff around them looked upon Yahweh in shock, awed by the Reality Warper's sudden appearance and unable to do anything about it. But really, 343 was no mere Reality Warper, like some had expected. 343 truly was a god. He just didn't happen to be the only one in play. When the Gate Guardian saw Yahweh now standing before him, he lowered his sword, spread his fiery wings, and took a knee in great reverence. Yahweh spoke calmly, but with unshakable authority.
Uriel, it is time. Open the gate. Lead my armies across the earth.
The Gate Guardian Uriel responded in its booming voice.
I hear and obey, my Lord and my God.
For the first time in recorded memory, the Grand Gate that Uriel had always been guarding opened, revealing thousands of legions of warrior angels waiting on the other side. They were impossibly beautiful and powerful creatures.
each one a vibrant, glowing chaos of wings and eyes, wielding pure white swords and singing resounding hymns of war. Soon the air was thick with a chorus of rustling wings as the angels loosened themselves from the gate's mouth, led by Uriel as Yahweh's general into the global fray. Meanwhile, back at Site 10, another SCP-001, the item that started all of this, the lock, was entering its next stage of grand cosmic evolution. Something within the lock suddenly unfurled, causing a shockwave that killed everyone at the site and destroying the entire building in an instant. Except in that same instant, all of the Site 10 staff and the building itself reappeared completely unharmed in a field in New Hampshire. Back where Site 10 used to be, the lock was doing some terraforming. The ground split open beneath into a mighty valley, the likes of which Earth had never seen before. Lush greenery sprouted within, and thousands of strange alien creatures soon populated this new place. In the center, the lock just floated in place. They were now ready for the first meeting to take place. Over at Site 2036, Dr. Everett Mann was working on a number of SCP-098 specimens. These are frightening creatures reminiscent of spider crabs, with blades instead of pincers and a natural ability to mimic the sounds of their prey. He was studying the creatures when he got a call, asking him if the specimens had acted up at all. They had already had sudden containment breaches for SCP-995, a type of dangerous carnivorous fungi, and SCP-616, a mysterious airplane with satanic elements to it. Just as Dr. Mann was about to reply, the 098 specimens metamorphosized into many winged flying creatures, which flew out of the chamber with such force that they busted through walls. Sirens blared all through the facility, and Dr. Mann joined the many other confused and frustrated Foundation staff members wandering the building, wondering just what the hell was going on today. They were getting bizarre reports of unprecedented anomalous activity from all over the world, with no explanation uniting it all. According to panicked whispers across the facility, Emergency Order Patmos was now in effect, whatever that meant. The true nature of what was going on here went over most of the heads of the SCP Foundation's staff. That's when Mann encountered Dr. Charles Ogden Gears, who, for such a famously emotionless man, looked surprisingly worried. Dr. Mann tried to downplay the situation, saying they were only looking at a handful of containment breaches here, nothing they hadn't handled before. Dr. Gears shut him down with trademark coldness. Feeling a little more nervous now, Dr. Everett Mann asked what else had gotten out. With steely eyes, Dr. Gears replied, "A whole damn lot." Congratulations, you did it. After years of working your fingers to the bone at the legendary SCP Foundation, putting your life, sanity, and perhaps even immortal soul at risk every single day, you suddenly find yourself standing at the very tip of the pyramid. You can now learn about the truth behind SCP-001. You'd be lying if you said it was an easy journey. You started about one rung above D-Class, a mere janitor, mopping hallways and cleaning toilets for personnel who actually got a piece of the action. Not that it meant you didn't have to experience risk on the job. You remembered one of the most terrifying moments of your life occurred during this period, back when you were just cleaning out office space in Site 19. You heard the door rattle behind you, and you rose back up just in time to see SCP-173 standing in the doorway, staring at you. You heard about this thing, about how you had to keep your eyes on it, or it would kill you, and then everything else. You stared at it, eyes watering in panic, hoping to keep it rooted in place, but it was starting to hurt. You could feel yourself straining. The surface of your eyes was so dry. Was this where you were going to die? Perhaps if you hadn't had the idea you had next. You blinked one eye, and then the other, keeping one eye open at all times. That kept the sculpture in place long enough for the site's security team to locate it and drag it back to containment. You'd saved your own life and many others that day, and decided in that moment that you may really have a future here. And you weren't the only one with this level of confidence. Hearing about your quick thinking and heroic bravery, the head of the site security team decided you might be an ideal candidate for his crew after the proper training. You jumped at the chance, of course, to experience the grueling barrage of physical and mental courses needed to survive and thrive under the pressure of being a dedicated Foundation guard.
Before long, you became an accepted member of the security team, and you'd go on to receive further commendations for your cool-headedness and bravery during dangerous containment breaches. From SCP-3199, SCP-106, and SCP-939 respectively, you were quickly turning into a respected figure among your Foundation peers. While some would be content to coast on that, you'd never been the kind of person who just rests on their laurels. By day, you worked to keep Site-19 safe from deadly containment breaches and infiltration from crafty groups of interest like the Chaos Insurgency and the Serpent's Hand. But by night, you were taking online college courses, slowly beefing up your qualifications in a number of esoteric research sciences. After years of hard work, you requested a transfer from Senior Security Officer to Junior Researcher. It'd be a step backwards in terms of career advancement, and you were also told you'd be getting a pay cut for your trouble. But you didn't care. You'd even start with archival work if it meant getting closer to the actual anomalies the Foundation was all about. So that's exactly what happened. You were made a junior researcher, and your first job was archival duties, sorting and digitizing years of files with a new computerized system. For some, this would be hell. For you, it's heaven. You're getting to see it all up close. The deepest, darkest secrets of the SCP Foundation. Well, not quite. At your low clearance level, there's only a certain amount you're able to access, even when filing things away. Stumbling into the wrong files and attempting to access them can be actively dangerous too, as many of them are protected with the kind of heavy-duty memetic kill agents that'd stop your heart before you'd even have a chance to click away. But funnily enough, that level of protection only made the forbidden fruit of knowledge seem more enticing. And the very peak of curiosities, locked under so many layers of secrecy and encryption, was the equal parts iconic and infamous SCP-001. Some senior researchers had spread rumors about the true nature of 001, but nobody truly had the full scope of it outside of the O5 Council. For pretty much everyone else, the true answers would be forever out of reach, like a distant but enrapturing mirage. And it was at that moment that you decided you'd simply have to become a member of the O5 Council. And for the rest of your life, that's exactly what you were trying to work towards. After all, rumor has it that the Council has access to secret life-extending anomalies that they use to linger around for centuries. A single meager lifetime working toward a seat at that table would be such a small price to pay when all was said and done. For the next few decades, you did everything you could to advance your position and climb through the ranks of this prestigious organization. You published award-winning research papers on the nature of thaumatology. You worked multiple 18-hour shifts a week, getting up close and personal with some of the most famous and dangerous anomalies on the books: SCP-106, SCP-096, and even SCP-682. You showed bravery and heroism during containment breaches, staying calm and keeping the people around you out of harm's way. And as you rise through the ranks, you always kept your goal in mind. You'll uncover the secrets of SCP-001. You have to know. You will know. There is no other acceptable outcome. While technically speaking, 001 is above classified, the SCP Foundation is an organization run by humans. Well, mostly anyway. And when humans are involved, nothing will ever be infallible. And after all, there's no such thing as a perfect seal. When you're rubbing elbows with Dr. Gears, Dr. Clef, and Dr. Bright, it's natural that some things start to slip out in conversation, even if strictly speaking, it's in defiance of official Foundation protocol. But something strikes you as very strange. As each one tells you about their vision of SCP-001, you notice that each is describing a completely different thing. Dr. Clef, for example, begins covertly telling you about something known as the Gate Guardian, also known by the alias Uriel. This being is said to act as the bouncer at the door to paradise. He's impossibly huge, with wings made of burning light and a sword of pure fire that's hotter than the sun. Clef tells you that the creature's sword is so powerful that it cleaves its victims apart on the atomic level, completely and utterly destroying every trace of them. Though he then grumbles with visible frustration that it failed in its attempts to kill SCP-682, adding, "No surprises there, right?" as he left to have a smoke.
Dr. Bright tells you an incredibly different story. To him, SCP-001 isn't a being, it's a location. An expansive factory from the 19th century that was created by pure evil occultist and industrialist James Anderson. This place initially seemed like a boon, providing jobs to the needy travelers and transients across the early United States. But this dream come true soon revealed itself to be a complete nightmare. Anderson was a brutal taskmaster who not only worked thousands of people to death but performed horrifying occult experiments on the grounds of the cursed building. You started to worry that perhaps Dr. Bright had a little too much to drink when he started ranting about how the factory helped a burgeoning SCP Foundation commit genocide against the Fae, but you were happy to receive more information about SCP-001 in any case. And Dr. Gears told a far more low-key story than the other two, which was fitting, really, for a man so incredibly buttoned down he probably thought of Lucky Charm marshmallows as an almost unspeakable act of self-indulgence. He told the story of a being he referred to as the Prototype, a dangerous and radioactive monster that functioned as the first truly threatening creature that the SCP Foundation ever faced. Containing it with imperfect methods even led to the death of Dr. Keter, which in turn led to the naming of the Keter class for any anomalies that were particularly challenging to contain. You were awash with data, and yet it somehow felt like you now knew less for sure. Was SCP-001 some kind of umbrella term for a vast collection of different anomalies, each one either deeply important or somehow formative for the SCP Foundation? Curiouser and curiouser. Naturally, this did nothing to deter your boundless drive to know the true secrets of this mysterious designation that seemed to exist at the very heart of the SCP Foundation. Years went on, and you went from a decorated senior researcher to the site director for Site-19. There, through even more years of hard work, you developed a reputation as one of the greatest directors the site ever had. You reduced containment breaches by a truly astonishing 80% during your tenure, and the breaches that did happen were significantly less deadly under your sterling management. General personnel satisfaction skyrocketed, with the people working under you both enjoying your leadership and respecting you enough to take you seriously. You were firm but fair, a truly exemplary site director. The more you climbed, the more information about SCP-001 seemed to fall into your lap. The sheer breadth of some of these concepts were staggering. The Scarlet King, the Black Moon, the Lock, the Broken God, a whole laundry list of terrifying existential threats hiding just under the thin crust of normalcy. Just how much were they hiding from you? Were they all real? Was only one real, and the rest an elaborate smokescreen? You just had to know. But even if it took your whole life? A 40-year career with the SCP Foundation, putting everything at hazard for a chance to gaze into the ultimate chest of secrets. And eventually, with the mysterious passing of a previous member of the O5 Council, which as far as anyone else knows you had nothing to do with, the position of O5-10 has opened up. And who else is next in line to that throne but you? Congratulations, you made it to the next step, the big boys table, and the truth about SCP-001 comes with the territory. You're given an orientation document written by a prior O5 Council member known as L.H. Sign from the Korean branch of the Foundation. It promises that after you put in your new O5 login credentials, it'll tell you everything you need to know about SCP-001. With quaking fingers, you type in your username and password, and the page opens, revealing the truth about SCP-001 to your eager eyes. Your jaw drops. Your forehead is suddenly doused in a sheen of cold sweat. No, you think, this has to be a joke. It can't be true. Your life, your whole life building up to learning, SCP-001 does not exist. The document, in upsettingly plain terms, explains to you that while some of the anomalies referred to as SCP-001 do exist in some capacity, the closest, funnily enough, being Dr. Gear's story about the prototype. For the most part, there is no such thing as 001, and the finer details are either entirely fabricated or, at the very least, greatly exaggerated. Everything you've been working towards. It was just one big fraud perpetrated by the Foundation. Why?
You found yourself asking in a trembling voice, why? And the answer was simple: to provoke the egos of the Foundation's personnel. You see, while the Foundation has always contained anomalies, that was a means to an end, not the end itself. The true purpose of the Foundation is and always has been protecting people, and every anomaly contained is more people protected. However, tricking the lower rungs of the Foundation into believing that there's some grand final boss to work towards, like a Black Moon or a Scarlet King, has been an effective method of keeping everyone motivated to swim in the same direction. This is hardly an unprecedented move for the SCP Foundation. From their lies around Procedure 110 Montauk, to the controlled deception around the rituals that supposedly keep the Devourer of Worlds on the other side of SCP-2317, the SCP Foundation has never shied away from lying to its own employees for the greater good. But you never expected it to happen to you, and you certainly never expected it to be about SCP-001. You feel like you've been laughed at for your entire life, but now you crack a quivering smile. Maybe your mind has snapped, or maybe you're just glad to finally be in on the joke. It almost goes without saying that the inner workings of the SCP Foundation are kept secret from the general population. Your average Joe doesn't need or want to know about the terrifying entities and bizarre experiments happening behind the closed doors of the various Foundation research sites. But there are some secrets of the SCP Foundation that even its own staff know very little about. One such mystery is the highly classified and immensely powerful O5 Council, or Overwatch Council, that oversees everything that goes on within the SCP Foundation. They are considered the highest authority within the organization, but very little is known about them. In fact, according to one official report in the SCP Foundation archives, the O5 Council does not exist at all. Stick with me here. There are decades of reports concerning the Council. There is a wealth of historical evidence pointing to their existence and influence, but they do not definitively exist. At least they don't right now. Take a deep breath, try and untangle the knots we just tied in your brain, sit back, and listen. This is the story of SCP-001, the O5 Council itself. In 1965, SCP Foundation Administrator William Cohen was preparing to leave his position. To prepare his successor, H.V. Oleander, Administrator Cohen drafted a series of letters intended to pass on important and highly guarded knowledge to the man who would take his place. In the letter, Administrator Cohen explained that he was retiring early for a specific reason, writing, "A dark clings to my mind, sticking to every neuron and slowing my every thought. In truth, I am unwell." Cohen's decline had begun 8 years prior, in late 1957, after the launch of Soviet space probe Sputnik 1 into the Earth's orbit. The Foundation's interest had been drawn to the probe after a foreign signal had been detected trying to communicate with it. Not a signal from a foreign nation, mind you, but something from much further away, and likely something that was not human. Whatever it was trying to communicate, and it was getting closer. On January 4th, 1958, the signal stopped and an unidentified object arrived on Earth. Cohen was summoned to the war room at Site 00 much to his surprise. It was highly unusual for guests to be invited to the site. There they worked together to identify the nature of the situation with Sputnik, until a single burst of gamma radiation was detected and Sputnik's orbit began to decay. The Council panicked, calling heads of state and calling for as many resources as possible. They had worked themselves into a frenzy and were planning to shoot down the first space probe in Earth's history. Eventually, the decision was placed in Cohen's hands. Let the probe land on its own, or shoot it down. Overwhelmed by the Council's intensity, Cohen told them to do what they thought was best. They shot it down. He did not want to, but he crumbled under the pressure. There were so many of them, and only one of him, and they seemed so certain in their decision. This was the first decision in his career that Cohen regretted, and it was presumably followed by many more. He continued in his letter saying, "And now what credibility do I have left to disagree with them? I am but a mouthpiece.
A sad old puppet tangled up and caught in the very strings used to make him dance.
Cohen wrote his letter to his successor with one warning.
Just as I have shown you vulnerability here in the hopes I might gain your trust, please consider asking the same from those who would insist you trust them.
In March of 1958, following the incident with Sputnik, the O5 Council collectively submitted a notice to the Foundation's Leadership Committee. They stated simply, "The individual you call your administrator has proven insufficient. We solicit you to make your preparations and nominate another." No individual members of the Council wrote in, but rather submitted their thoughts as a collective, as if thinking together as one single mind. The language used was also curious, saying "your administrator" rather than "our administrator." The O5 Council seemed to think of itself as something separate from the SCP Foundation, its own entity rather than simply a powerful arm or leader of the organization itself. On June 11, 1962, another notice was sent out. It read, "Foundation, a life lived in service of the greater good is invalidated if death does not also serve." On November 11, 1965, a third notice was sent out, this time to all Foundation staff. Please join us in remembering the life and career of Administrator William Cohen. The only constant is change. Because of this, the erosion of his skills, abilities, knowledge, and confidence was inevitable. Administrator H.V. Oleander took over the position for many years after Cohen's demise. In 1988, he prepared to step down and drafted a letter to his successor, Natalia Ellingbrook. Like Cohen before him, Oleander tried his best to explain where he went wrong, in the hope that she might do better. Oleander began the letter. "I used to have such an ego. This job, this life, and the burdens that surround it crush and squeeze you until all you have left is what they force you to keep. My mind and my soul feel as though they've been contorted into the shape of someone I no longer recognize. My predecessor, may he rest in peace, described his years as if he were trapped behind smoky glass and made to watch a foggy world pass him by. Like some sort of voyeur, I too feel imprisoned, but I realize that it was never a looking glass. It is a mirror." The events detailed in the letter began in November of 1985, after a powerful storm had ripped through New England and caused severe damage to Site 31's power grid. During the power outage, a multi-stage containment breach occurred and an unnamed infovore escaped from the facility. The entity was lost until March of 1986, when it was detected in a government facility in Warsaw, Poland. Determined to make up for his previous failure, Oleander organized a mission to bring the entity back into custody. His team tracked it down and was prepared to apprehend the entity's host, when the O5 Council expressed concern that this behavior might cause an international incident and intervened. The Council made the decision to reach out to local and international governments in Poland, allowing the entity to escape to Pripyat, Ukraine. Oleander and the Council went head-to-head on this, pushing and pulling and becoming increasingly aggressive on either side. Oleander could not make up his mind about what to do, listen to the Council, or trust his own gut. On April 26, 1986, his indecision resulted in a nuclear disaster in Soviet territory. Not only that, but the entity still evaded containment. The mission was a complete failure. The O5 Council submitted a report on the incident stating, "We recommended that the healing process commence by first assigning blame. The collective good would be served by purging liability. And we would have helped. Anyone would have helped. Why deny it?" By now, the pattern has probably become clear to you. The administrator and the council fall into conflict over a difficult decision. Something goes horribly wrong, a new administrator is chosen, the former administrator writes them a letter to prepare them for the heavy demands of the job, and the cycle begins again. As you might expect during those days of her administration, Oleander's replacement, Natalie Ellingbrook, sat down to write a letter of warning to one Michelle Wilkes, who was chosen to replace her. Ellingbrook began her letter. "As you've likely surmised from our few meetings, I walk with a pronounced limp and favor my left leg. How I came to be like this isn't especially interesting, but what it did to me might be of interest to a person in your position. Any man or woman changes when they are exposed to pain. Simply put, It has to go somewhere. If you hold it all within yourself, it may stay contained, but it will surely destroy you when you've had your fill. It festers in all the spaces you let it occupy, warping and scarring what used to be healthy, happy tissue sat beneath. Some people have hobbies, but me, I've always just had my work. I've been ringside for so much pain in my time with the Foundation. My predecessor left me a note, much like I am leaving you, and in it he warned me of the tremendous duty and guilt he hid in order to do his job. Although the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune stung him quite keenly, I assure you I have suffered every bit his equal. The breach at the Olympics in '94, losing control of Site 248 in '96, botched facility transfer of Hong Kong in '97, bombings in Bali in '02, the dispute with the ORIA in the Congo in '03, the GOC ultimatum in '04. She continued. Although I have weathered much, my tenure is up not with the sort of precipitating bang that ousted Oleander, but rather the quiet whimper of stepping away from a battle I no longer wish to fight. I am tired of the council calling a meeting on every decision I try to make, and I'm tired of calling one on every decision they try to make without me. I guess that reasoning is another tribute to the selfish life I have led. My ideal way to say goodbye would have been to simply stop coming in. My desk would have sat empty, emails unread, until one day a courier showed up with my keys and badge. But even here, at the end of my career, the O5 Council insists on refusing to let me be by myself. So tomorrow I will play the part of a dutiful officer resigning her post and walk away from Site 00 with my head held high and those overbearing bastards in the rearview mirror. I pray that your head will never be so bowed as mine has. Administrator Wilkes took her predecessor's words to heart and began her tenure with a new proposal for Project Tethys. The project would include modifications to the Three Gorges Dam facility at the Yangtze River. As part of a containment procedure for Entity 2005-C-ET-011, the Council refused to approve her proposal. Administrator Wilkes insisted that they provide a list of concerns, explaining what their issues with their proposal were. The two argued back and forth over the necessity of a meeting until the Council submitted this note to her. We know how important it is to get off on the right foot. Although this body respects you and the autonomy which you command, we have also seen many come and go. You were chosen from your peers, but they have chosen many others in the past. We remain unconvinced. Before you, Allingbrook, who spent her whole life pushing others aside so she could lead. She left all others behind. Trees with no roots do not hold to the ground. Before her, Oleander, who wanted so much to be seen as your hero in white. He could no longer live with himself once his clothes were stained, but the sin does not define the saint. Before him, Cohen, who wanted nothing more than to be the one who made the decisions. He collapsed in on himself when there was no easy victory. No man is an island, and a dozen more whose names we have subrogated. You need us. You are not enough. Administrator Wilkes was offended by this response and argued that the meeting was unnecessary. She asked for the council to trust her expertise and the expertise of her employees. They responded, "Your distinctiveness did not arise from the ether. You are a synthesis of available materials and experiences. If needed, another could be synthesized. We are needed. We are necessary. We synthesize. You are not. You cannot. Become we or become they. The choice is yours." Administrator Wilkes suddenly understood. The council was not a part of the Foundation. They were something else entirely. Though she couldn't be completely sure what they were, she knew one thing for certain. They were not her friends. She fired back at the council's threats. "You cast your shadow over the future with your threats and intimidation. Certain we would be nothing without you. But I'm forced to wonder, who or what would you be without us? I stand with the countless thousands that have died for our mission. The people that have engineered our solutions, the people that will build them, and the people that will risk their lives in order to carry out these procedures in the hope our mission might one day be complete. Without them, I know I would be nothing. We are willing to take our chances without you. I'm going to offer you the same choice you gave me. Become we or become they." Several days passed with no response. and Administrator Wilkies made the most difficult decision of her career. She suspended the appointment of the O5 Council until a day comes when it becomes necessary again. Secure Area 00 has been set up around the area containing SCP-001. The area has been classified, designated Level 6 or Cosmic Secret. The coordinates of this secure area are stored in cranial implants placed in 15 carefully selected Foundation leaders, including Ethics Committee members and site directors. These candidates can participate in voting once a vote is called, but are to be kept unaware of their status as voters until it becomes necessary. If a supermajority votes to decrypt the contents of these cranial implants, the location of Secure Area 00 will be revealed to them. If the security of these implants becomes compromised, Cogita.aic will generate a new protocol, and a new list of candidates will be selected. The original candidates will have the encrypted information deleted from their minds. No one may access Secure Area 00 at any time for any reason, unless the aforementioned vote takes place. Operation protocols, defenses, building schematics, and all other information about the site have been expunged from Foundation records. What's this? A new addendum has been unlocked. This is for your eyes and ears only. Yes, I'm talking to you. Do not share this information with anyone else. A retinal scan has confirmed your identity, and the Cogito protocol has been executed. You are receiving this addendum because Administrator Michelle Wilkies is dead after nearly 20 years of service. Before her death, she prepared a statement regarding the role of administrator at the Foundation. The addendum contains a message from Administrator Michelle Wilkies to you, her designated successor. Surprise! You have been chosen as the next administrator for the SCP Foundation. You may be surprised, asking, "Really? Me?" Yes, you. You may not know it, but you were chosen quite some time ago. The cranial implant has been in place for years. Now it is ready to be activated. Michelle Wilkies' message is intended to prepare you for the trials and tribulations that lie ahead, and to encourage you to ask yourself, what kind of leader will you be? Are you willing to do whatever it takes to perform this most solemn duty? The following comes from the former administrator herself. Listen carefully and consider what she has to say. Your future at the Foundation, the fate of your subordinates, and your very legacy may depend on it. Consider now, before fate takes away the luxury of time, what type of person, co-worker, and leader you want to be. Each and every day, one of the administrators before me was challenged in terms both great and small during their tenures, and I was no exception to this pattern. The office you occupy is not about the power and influence you now command, nor is it ever about the unfathomable responsibility you must now shepherd. It is instead about the character, integrity, and vision with which you will meet the test of leadership, and should you prove worthy, surmount it. You and the people you will lead must be asked to undertake tasks no person should ever be asked to carry out. Yet duty and the safety of all mankind demand that you make this sacrifice. For them, for each other. If your resolve should ever falter, know that everyone you lead stands with you. We are ready to follow you into the blackest night if you let us believe in the promise of dawn. But should your resolve ever break, the Council awaits. They will invite you to Site 00 if you ask. You need only surrender. Best wishes, M. Wilkies, former administrator. What exactly is the O5 Council? That is a question not easily answered. They are not flesh and blood, not individual minds and feelings, but something else entirely. They are a collective, something that thinks, breathes, and votes together as one being. They view the world as two things, we and they. As you prepare to take on the role of administrator, keep in mind who you are. Be strong, be brave, be resolute, and hold on to your sense of right and wrong. But if you ever should falter, if you decide to stop being you and become we, there is always Site 00. Remember, even though they do not officially exist, the Council awaits. The man sprinted through the hallways of Site 01 as fast as he could. Bullets whizzed over his shoulders as panic shouts went up all around him. The whole facility was bathed in red as security alarms deafened his ears. He had to move fast, had to get out of here before it was too late. A force smacked him in the back so hard that he fell onto his face, skidding across the vinyl floor. Planting both hands on the ground and trying to push himself back up, he felt his right shoulder blade creaking and bending against itself. He'd been shot enough times in his life to know what a bullet-shattered bone felt like. Trying his best to ignore the pain washing through his body, he kept running. More bullets hit him in his torso, his shoulders, his arms, and his neck. One even caught the top of his skull, slicing a clear line through his hair, but he kept running. The doors were slowly closing in front of him as the Foundation personnel swarmed the hallways. All he had to do was make it to those doors, slide through the gap, and he'd be free. If only they could understand. If only all the agents, researchers, and the Overseer Council could make sense of what he was telling them, they would let him go through these doors instead of trying to shoot him down like a dog. Just 10 feet to go. He was nearly there when a bullet ripped through his calf and sent him tumbling to the ground again. But this time, before he could get up, a rain of bullets washed through his body, igniting a pain so fierce that he wished it could all just be over. But it never was. The pile of pitiful remains was wheeled back into a containment cell with a door locked behind it. You would think the body lying on the floor was some kind of roadkill, but it was in fact a man. A man whose body slowly and painfully, over the course of 4 months, pushed every one of the 247 bullets out of itself and got to work stitching itself back together as he lay there weeping on his own. Andrea Twain had been headhunted by the Foundation while she was still in college. Sitting in a Harvard library, she'd been hard at work on her thesis, pouring hour after hour into researching jellyfish. She was starting to see them in her sleep, and she was falling asleep at her desk quite a lot. Fueled by energy drinks and cups of coffee, it was starting to seem like the jellyfish were floating all around her between the bookshelves. That's why when she was approached by Foundation operatives offering her a place studying the most top-secret entity on the planet, she was pretty sure it was all in her head. But then, 6 months later, and living in a facility that she didn't even know the location of, it started to dawn on her the gravity of the task she had been handed.
Her research topic had been the Hydrosian Turritopsis dornai, a small jellyfish with the power to reverse the aging process, dubbed the immortal jellyfish.
She had been right on the verge of cracking what was the creature's genetic makeup that made it able to produce cells younger than those that they were replacing, a feat that could cure all number of human diseases and revolutionize medicine and society as we know it. But standing at the window in Site-01 and looking through the glass at SCP-001, Andrea realized that all of her research had barely scratched the surface of what was possible. On the other side of the window sat SCP-001. To many, this SCP was probably very disappointing to look at. It wasn't a giant reptile, it couldn't teleport around the facility, it didn't even have any visible powers, or really anything to distinguish it from any of the other researchers sitting on the other side of the glass. It looked entirely like a regular human male. It was housed in a standard humanoid containment cell with no added security features. It was sustained on a standard humanoid meal program, 3 square meals a day with the correct number of calories, nutrients, and vitamins. If anything, SCP-001 probably had a more balanced diet than Andrea herself did. Some researchers have questioned the need for feeding this SCP. It was immortal, totally unkillable, and resistant to aging. It had been burned alive, drowned in acid, and beaten to a pulp, and yet very slowly, it would always recover. So why did they feed it? If they didn't, it would get quite grumpy. More than anything in the world, Andrea was desperate to talk to it. Containment procedures were very strict around this SCP. There would be no contact beyond the delivery of meals, no conversations, no sign language, nothing. It would sit by itself alone in silence, and 3 times a day, a meal would be placed in front of it by a researcher who would promptly leave. The reason? SCP-001 could predict the future. Initial research into this SCP found that it had an uncanny ability to describe events that had not yet occurred, despite having no exposure to the outside world. It could predict an entire season of Major League Baseball, right down to the individual player performances. It foretold the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Chernobyl meltdown, 9/11, the crash of the housing market, and countless other events. In 2004, a careless researcher asked SCP-001 what the weather was looking like. SCP-001 proceeded in detail to describe Hurricane Katrina, from its formation through to the humanitarian response and the political fallout. a full year before any of those events unfolded. The Foundation has tried and failed to use these predictions in order to prevent tragedies from occurring, but due to ironic twists of fate, any attempts to prevent these predictions from coming true often wind up fulfilling them. In the case of Chernobyl, agents who were deployed into the Soviet Union to work in the power plant itself wound up making critical blunders that led to the reactor's meltdown. If the Foundation had not gotten involved, the accident would have been averted. That said, taking a passive approach does not appear to be an effective countermeasure either. It seems that whatever SCP-001 predicts, that course of history becomes inevitable. How could you not want to talk to such an entity? As Andrea stood at the glass watching it, she knew she had to hatch a plan. The Foundation may not be able to prevent these tragedies from occurring, but surely they would want to know what's going to happen. They were researchers after all, and their job was to discover information. Predicting the future, that was the most valuable information of all. But it went deeper than that. If anything, the predictions of the future were a byproduct in Andrea's mind. There was something suspicious going on with this SCP, something that the Foundation was trying its best to keep under wraps. She had seen it in the classified documents, files left out on desks that should have been locked away securely. Security and procedure had grown lax with the monotony of containing this SCP. In these files were interview snippets, a chance for this SCP to reveal who it truly was. At the start of the first interview, Dr. Lynch simply, pleasantly greeted SCP-001. He replied, "Your daughter will be hit by a bus before her 7th birthday. I can tell you the specific day if you'd like." The interview session was paused as Dr. Lynch grew distressed and had to leave his post to go and spend time with his family. The interview resumed under Dr. Goldstein, who asked SCP-001 why he felt the need to give such distressing information to Dr. Lynch. He replied, "I have told you people countless times before, you are not to refer to me as SCP-001. I am the founder of this organization and you will address me as such." When Dr. Goldstein questioned that assertion, SCP-001 replied, "You really don't believe everything they have on file, do you? Address me as founder or I will tell you about what your husband is up to, Dr. Goldstein." Things collapsed very quickly after that. Andrea's plan started, as so many great plans do, with her sprinkling a chemical compound over one of her colleagues' Cheerios. It was nothing poisonous, well, at least not that poisonous, but it would put him out of action for a few months, long enough for her to assume his position. Andrea had been next in line for a while to take over the role of meal deliveries for SCP-001, and as her fellow researcher violently vomited into a bucket in the corner of their office, she knew that her time had come. With the plastic tray in her hands, loaded with some kind of beige slop and an apple, she waited in the doorway, ready for the seals to hiss and the door to slide slowly open for her. She stepped into the room, trembling. She had expected the air in here to be stale, breathed and rebreathed for decades by the same man. But of course it had been expertly filtered and purified by the Foundation systems. The air in here was as clean and balanced as it had been on the other side of the glass. The founder looked up at her as she walked towards him. She would be a new face to him, something he hadn't seen for the prior 5 years. His eyes dug into her, showing no surprise at all. She suddenly realized that, of course, he wouldn't be shocked to see someone new. He could see the future. He knew that she was coming. Suddenly unsure of herself, she wondered what else he knew about her future, about her most closely guarded secrets, about whether her plan would work at all. Andrea placed the meal in front of him silently, knowing that the cameras and microphones were all paying close attention to her. Subtly as she could, she nodded at SCP-001, turned around, and left the room. Andrea's heart hammered as she sat back down on the other side of the glass with her colleagues. Her entire plan hinged on one thing: monotony. All of the checks, all of the vigilance, all of the scrutiny that had been poured into SCP-001 for decades had to have faded by now. Faded just enough for the person watching the security cameras not to notice one word etched into the plastic tray as SCP-001 took its spoonful of food. Now! SCP-001 launched from its chair and sprinted towards the door in the corner of the room. Before any of the other researchers could react, Andrea slammed a hand on the open door button. There was a hissing sound, and the SCP was free from its containment cell. Confused voices filled the room, yelling over one another in utter confusion. They had all been so caught off guard that none of them had paid attention to what had just happened. Before they had time to put the pieces together, Andrea was out of the door herself, running down the corridor. There was just one door between her and the SCP. She ran over to key in the security code to open the door and let the SCP out. But before she could even touch the keypad, a bullet caught her in the chest, and she collapsed to the ground, wheezing. A scared security agent stared at her wide-eyed.
What have you done?
He exclaimed. Then, both of them turned to look at the locked door, waiting. Andrea Twain had not wanted to let the SCP out until she saw one specific line from an interview tape. SCP-001, referring to itself as the Founder, explained in patient detail how it was entirely supportive of the Foundation's goals, motivations, and actions. It had no intention of intervening with any of their work. It explained that all of their ideas were, in fact, its own, as it was the one who had created the Foundation in the first place. But there was something coming. A prediction that SCP-001 refused to speak out loud under any circumstances. It had just one request that it would repeat to every interviewer for decades after decade. They had to free it, so it could prevent that event from happening. It must be allowed to construct a device. Otherwise, well, it actually never explains that part. Neither does it explain what this device is, and point-blank refuses to allow another to build this device in its stead. Due to the unpredictability of what would happen if SCP-001 was allowed to construct this device, the Overseer Council has point-blank refused to entertain the notion, but Andrea just couldn't shake it from her mind. This SCP was capable of accurately and precisely predicting all number of future events right down to the granular details, no matter how tragic and how dark. Yet there was an unknown in its future. It didn't know whether it would be released or not. It had to beg for its freedom. Whatever it needed this device to defeat was clearly so powerful that it went beyond SCP-001's capacity to predict and understand it. There was an event coming that was so significant that it created chaos and uncertainty in SCP-001's perfect view of the future, and there was only one entity that Andrea trusted to be powerful enough to counteract this event. And as she lay there dying in a pool of her own blood, she looked up through the glass window in the door at the entity she trusted and watched as it keyed in the passcode to the door. The door slid open, and the SCP took off running along the hallway. With her dying breaths, Andrea told the SCP the passcode to the door that it had just opened, understanding the brilliance of what had just happened. The SCP had been able to open that door because it had seen the future where she told it the password. And with that, she smiled and laid her head down on the hard floor. Except SCP-001 did not manage to escape. It was gunned down in the hallway with 247 bullets that brutalized its body and was wheeled back into its containment cell, where it began the slow process of healing. For most of the research team, things went back to business as usual, albeit with slightly better security. But to the handful of researchers who really thought about what had happened, a sense of unease settled on their shoulders. SCP-001 would have known before it ran out of that cell and attempted Andrea's plan that its escape was going to fail. It would have known decades prior to the exact positions of the 247 bullets that pounded into its body. It would have known the searing agony that it would have to endure for months as its body slowly healed from its failed escape attempt. And yet, it had gone through with it anyway. What set of events had been put into motion when Andrea carved those 3 letters into the plastic tray? What greater purpose was SCP-001 working towards? And was it now too late to stop it?
Supernatural monsters are on the loose. Practitioners of the arcane arts are here to bring about the end of the world. Sinister paramilitary forces are using paranormal objects to gain an edge over their enemies. In short, things are messed up. And when the anomalous is out of line, we all know that there's only one group you'd ever think to call: the FBI's Unusual Incidents Unit. What? Were you expecting someone else? Sure, they don't have the resources of the SCP Foundation. They don't have the strategy of the Global Occult Coalition. They don't have the ruthlessness of the Chaos Insurgency, or the arcane knowledge advantages of the Serpent's Hand. But they've got to have something, right? Right? Okay, maybe you're not convinced, but you will be.
You may not respect them yet, but you'll change your tune when you find out that the Unusual Incidents Unit has dealt with one of the most important anomalies out there, SCP-001, or as the true experts over at the UIU call it, CA3, short for Confirmed Anomaly 3. If the evidence and files put together by the UIU are to be believed, and who are we kidding, of course they are, then they may have the answer to one of the anomalous world's biggest questions. How was the SCP Foundation actually formed? But before we jump into the mysteries of CA3, let's talk a little bit more about the real heroes of today's story, the UIU. This secretive offshoot of the FBI, America's premier domestic intelligence agency, was personally commissioned by J. Edgar Hoover during the Cold War. Why? For the same reason that literally everything happened in the US during the Cold War, to get an edge over the Soviets. Hoover was an extraordinarily powerful man in US politics, his tenure as FBI director spanning the terms of 8 different presidents. If he wanted to start a unit of agents whose sole job was investigating the supernatural, nobody would dare stand in his way. Everyone always talks about the nuclear arms race going on back in the 1960s, but far fewer people talk about the supernatural arms race that was happening at the exact same time. World War II coincided neatly with the 7th Occult War, an important geopolitical event that played a huge role in shaping the global occult coalition, and a number of high-ranking members of the Nazi Party were believed to be key figures in this secret magical war. When the Soviets sacked a number of German cities as part of their offensive campaigns in World War II, they were able to bring back scores of anomalous items that the Nazis had been using to consolidate dark power. This didn't bode well for the United States government during the Cold War. After all, the only thing scarier to them than communists were magical communists. The US needed to build up its own anomalous arsenal, and that's where the UIU came in. The FBI allocated some of its okayest personnel to the task. Most were either agents who had experienced a paranormal encounter out in the field, or who were being punished for some kind of heinous mistake they'd made carrying out their duties elsewhere. Despite not being the best of the best, these agents sure were eager to get their hands on some cans. That isn't an innuendo, by the way. The Foundation refers to anomalies it deals with as SCPs, or SCIPs. The GOC calls them parathreats, and the UIU calls them CANs, again short for Confirmed Anomalies. Well, when it's an anomalous event or location, anyway. Anomalous objects like cursed books or supernaturally powerful weapons are referred to as CARTs, or Confirmed Artifacts. And finally, anomalous people or sentient entities are referred to by the unfortunate name of Can Man. It may not sound as cool, but hey, it gets the job done just fine in the end. While the Unusual Incidents Unit may lack the knowledge, strength, resources, and even cred of its fellow groups of interest, that doesn't mean that it doesn't keep track of the others. In fact, the UIU has a pretty unique relationship with each of them. The GOC, for example, is nicknamed the Suits by the UIU. The official UIU orientation states that the Suits outrank them, and if they're asked to follow an order by a member of the Suits, they should just go ahead and do it. Same goes for members of the Fireworks, which is the UIU lingo for the Chaos Insurgency. Unlike the Foundation, which generally has the resources to go toe-to-toe with the Chaos Insurgency, the UIU are rightfully terrified of them. Official orders from the top are for UIU agents to do whatever they say, or they might find themselves getting shot in the head by a Chaos Insurgent, or worse. Next, the Cart Shoppers, also known as Marshall, Carter, and Dark, a sinister gentleman's club and auctioneer of anomalous items. Official protocol is to raid any deals being conducted by Marshall, Carter, and Dark, but oftentimes these raids are unsuccessful, because MC&D's security force are more competent fighters than anyone on the Unusual Incidents Unit payroll. On the other hand of the spectrum are the Can Collection, the official UIU nickname for the Serpent's Hand. UIU leadership recommends against their agents staging any one-on-one confrontations with them. Official memos also contain the phrase, if they give you an order, consider following it. They can probably set you on fire with their mind. And finally, the most important relationship of all is the one they have with the SCP Foundation. Much like the rest of the groups of interest on their roster, the UIU is subordinate to the SCP Foundation, their agents happily taking orders from them at the drop of a hat. They call the Foundation the Skippers, but don't let that casual name fool you. The SCP Foundation is so far above them on the pecking order that they rarely even communicate in any official capacity. When the Foundation talks to the UIU, it's always through code. They wouldn't dream of letting a hapless UIU agent helping them on any major operation, but lazier agents of the Foundation might occasionally outsource work to UIU agents. If ever one of these plucky feds receives a message starting with, "Hey Skipper," they can be sure they're about to have a low-priority anomalous case pawned off on them. The UIU are so subservient to the SCP Foundation that it has sometimes resulted in truly humiliating mix-ups. One high-ranking member of the UIU once took orders from a pizza delivery guy because he thought the pizzeria's name, the Spiced Crust Pizzeria, which could be shortened to SCP, was actually a coded plan sent by the Foundation to deliver a message, rather than a deep dish pepperoni and cheese. Incidents like this are why nobody takes the UIU seriously. But according to them, there was a time before all of this. That time ended on September 7th, 1954, when CA3, or SCP-001 as the Foundation would later call it, first appeared on the UIU's radar. It seemed to be the most standard can you could possibly imagine, an anomalous high school building causing a disturbance in the suburbs of small-town America. The UIU received the call after a number of students claimed the interior of their schools suddenly looked completely different than it ever had before, despite there being no records of an official remodel. And we're not just talking about moving furniture and a new coat of paint either. The official CA3 file logs a number of changes. These include, but are not limited to, all the walls in the building becoming steel-reinforced concrete, all the windows being blacked out from the inside, all student desks, personal effects, textbooks, and any other standard equipment left inside the school simply disappearing in the night. The entire floor plan of the building seemed to have shifted, with rooms altering in both dimensions and location, as well as featuring seemingly random modifications within. None of this matched up with the building's original blueprints, which were obtained by the UIU shortly after the can was reported. But things got even stranger for investigating UIU agents. The building now contained 17 computers, each with state-of-the-art magnetic core RAM and advanced cybersecurity. For a suburban high school in 1954, it goes without saying that this was extremely impressive. But weirdest of all was the fact that a large and seemingly impenetrable steel wall had appeared in the auditorium, blocking it off and leaving whatever was taking place on the other side a complete mystery. Naturally, the UIU did what little they could to investigate the matter. The first investigation group they sent inside, Team CA305, never came back out, and Team CA306, the team they sent in to locate and retrieve the first team, also disappeared within the anomaly. Classic UIU expertise at work. Almost a month after discovery and initial containment, a strange noise began emanating from the auditorium. Shortly after that, the building became filled with people, all walking around and working at different operations. Eerily, everyone there had a resemblance to members of Team CA306, the rescue team sent in to save the 12 members of CA305, all of whom were still unaccounted for. 3 months later, the strangeness escalated. More noises came from the auditorium, and the anomalous people inside the building had gathered around the steel wall within. There was a hole in the wall 6 feet in diameter, and every 3 minutes for several hours, the people in the room would appear to simply pull an anomalous object out of it. The items were then carried away and placed in one of the many rooms that used to be classrooms before being locked up. The people within the building then seemed to start guarding these strange items. Others started performing tests with what seemed like far more advanced technology and methods than what was possessed by the UIU during the 1950s. What was going on here? A few days later, several armed guards exited the building and began guarding the perimeter. When UIU personnel attempted to lead an assault on these guards, they were quickly overpowered, even when advancing with vastly superior numbers. Whether this was due to the skill of the guards or the incompetence of UIU agents is still very much an open question. Though strangely enough, intel bleeding out from the inside confirmed that the people within were treating their anomalous items with UIU containment and testing protocols, which is consistent with the knowledge that CA305 would have had. It seemed almost as though 05, or copies of 05, were creating a new splinter organization from within. And soon enough, it wasn't just confined to the interior of the CA3 building anymore. CA6, a can man that the UIU had been tracking outside the school, was suddenly kidnapped and shoved into a black car by two assailants, who appeared identical to Agent Dixon, a man who had been a member of Team CA306. The black car then returned to the CA3 facility and was allowed to enter into the complex by the armed guards. CA6 was then removed from the car by the Dixon clones and placed into containment in one of the classrooms. It wasn't long after that the anomalous people within the CA3 facility made direct contact with the UIU outside. They sent a message in Morse code on May 1st, 1965. The people sending this message identified themselves as the 05 Council, a name that seemed to be taken directly from the 05 recon team sent into the facility months ago. They identified the new organization that they just constructed within the confines of the CA3 facility, the SCP Foundation. They just opened their very first containment site. This new foundation expressed the desire to become allies with the Unusual Incidents Unit, but sadly for them, it was essentially the last time they'd ever really be relevant. If this Foundation origin story is to be believed, and as with all entries under the title SCP-001, it's worth taking it with a healthy dose of skepticism. Then the UIU witnessed the birth of the organization that would quickly go on to outperform and overshadow them. A big win for humanity in the quest to secure, contain, and protect ourselves from dangerous anomalies, but another L for the UIU.
If you ask anyone, any person from any culture, any part of the world to describe what death looks like, most people will immediately jump to a depiction of the Grim Reaper. And rightly so. The Reaper has long been the personification of death and decay. An omen of demise, the cloaked skeleton bearing a sharp scythe, coming to collect souls and carrying them off to either heaven or hell. For centuries, human beings have thought of the Grim Reaper as death itself, but he's more of an embodiment of it. A symbol meant to represent that all too familiar fear of not knowing what lies beyond life on this fragile mortal plane of existence. Death itself, the real death, looks completely different. Welcome to the story of SCP-001. Now first things first, to anyone familiar with the SCP Foundation, you will most likely know that there are multiple SCP-001s. You might even think that you know which of them is the real one. But for those of you who are new here, allow us to clarify for you this important context. The designation of SCP-001 does not refer to a single creature, object, or entity, but rather a collection of various anomalies that are allegedly kept contained by the SCP Foundation. Now, there are multiple explanations as to why these various files are all collected under the shared designation of SCP-001. One explanation could be that this is because these anomalies are some of the earliest ever contained by the Foundation. By this rationale, all the SCP-001 share the same designation because they were first encountered before the SCP Foundation established the numbering system that it currently uses. However, there also exists a theory that this is nothing more than intentional misdirection. If we choose to believe this explanation, then it could mean that the many different SCP-001s are a devious ploy by the Foundation themselves. In the interest of maintaining secrecy and security, having many files sharing the name SCP-001 could be the Foundation's way of keeping the nature of the true first SCP a closely guarded secret. It seems plausible that the multiple SCP-001 files could be an attempt by the Foundation to conceal information. After all, it wouldn't be the first time this secretive organization deceived someone. So what exactly is this particularly morbid take on SCP-001? Well, first you have to have a pretty high level of security clearance within the SCP Foundation if you want to even come close to accessing this file. In fact, any and all details about the anomaly codenamed Deadmen is protected by Hellenstick, an AIC used by the Foundation's Overwatch Command, also known as the 05 Council. An AIC, for those who are not yet aware, is an advanced form of artificial intelligence that the Foundation develops and uses to run parts of its archive of anomalies. What does that mean for SCP-001? Well, it's pretty simple. The people in charge of the Foundation want this file to remain secure. Or it could be because the 05 Council is hiding something that the general staff members aren't meant to know about. Getting past all the additional security surrounding this particular file, we learn that SCP-001, or this one at least, is
an old man. An 84-year-old man, to be precise. Wait, that's it? That's what the big, closely guarded secret is? Just some old guy? No. Of course he's not just some old guy. The Foundation's highest-ranking members wouldn't go through such trouble over one ordinary man. This particular man has become one with death. Not the Reaper, no. Death itself. The very concept of death has been merged with this individual. A lot more interesting than just a normal old man, right? To be clear, this man is not an incarnation or embodiment of death like the Grim Reaper. Instead, he has become a vessel for the process of making something that was once alive not. So this old man, SCP-001, can control life and death? Not quite. The old man's body is more like a way that death itself can be influenced. It may help to picture it like this. Imagine SCP-001 as a television remote control for death. Except instead of pressing buttons like you would on a remote, you have to remove or alter parts of the old man's body. And in doing so, you can manipulate the process of death, albeit only to a limited extent. You can't, for example, permanently stop death from existing or occurring, stopping everyone around the world from dying. That's not quite how SCP-001 works. Here, let's give you an example. SCP-001 had his tongue removed as well as had sustained damage to his eardrums before he was contained by the Foundation. So as a result of those alterations to his body, there are fewer deals with death events in the modern era. You see what we mean now? Changing SCP-001 changes how death functions, but doesn't necessarily stop it from happening. So in essence, although there are parameters, SCP-001 is the Foundation's way of controlling death itself. How did they decide to go about doing this? Well, once we tell you, you will understand why the O5 Council wanted to keep information about SCP-001 such a secret. After performing a series of complex brain surgeries and various other procedures on the old man, the Overwatch Command intentionally engineered him to be unable to perceive certain people. Who were those people? You guessed it, the O5 Council themselves. Making SCP-001 unable to recognize the faces of any O5 Council members means that death is unable to see or perceive the Council members either. All those pieces fit together to form a particularly unsettling jigsaw puzzle. By tampering with SCP-001, the O5 Council have made themselves effectively immortal. They cannot die, nor will they age or decay like normal mortal human beings. Death still occurs, of course. Other beings can die, but the Council members are exempt from that fundamental law of nature. The Foundation believes that SCP-001 was initially created by an occult group known as the Eternal Circle. Thanks to records recovered from the Circle's London headquarters, the SCP Foundation now knows that they were the ones responsible for merging the old man with the concept of death. When their personnel first recovered SCP-001, the old man was frail, in a poor physical condition and barely responded to any external stimuli. Research staff believe he must have suffered severe trauma at the hands of the Eternal Circle, evidenced by the circular symbols that had been carved into his back. Oh, and also the fact that his body parts had all been modified. Contained within the file for this SCP-001 is a letter directly from the O5 Council themselves, explaining their reasons for using the old man to become immortal. They justify their actions by claiming that they have a wealth of experience in containing anomalies and keeping the SCP Foundation running. This is, to them, a perfectly valid reason to make themselves exempt from death rather than aging, retiring, and dying, to later be replaced by new members on the Overwatch Council. They claim that their immortality is not for their own self-benefit, of course, but for the good of the Foundation as an organization, and, by extension, the world as a whole. The Council also promised that the same death-exempt status would later be extended to other vital members of personnel. However, according to the Hellenistic AIC guarding the file, no personnel have been considered for death-exempt status in the future. In other words, the O5 Council were lying and intended to keep their get-out-of-death-free card to themselves. It wasn't long before the Foundation's very own Ethics Committee learned about what the Council was up to, and naturally they had some concerns. According to a report issued by Committee Chairman Odongo Tejani, the way the O5 Council were using SCP-001 to prolong their own lives was immoral and inhumane, even by their own strange standards. by using this poor, frail old man for their own gain. The Council had warped the natural way death should work, and threatened to anomalously unbalance the very laws of nature. The Ethics Committee had no other choice but to dispatch its own mobile task force, known as Omega-1 or the Law's Left Hand, to rectify the situation. Their mission? To detain all members of the O5 Council at their next meeting, removing them from office and replacing them with high-ranking candidates from within the Foundation's lower ranks. Finally, they also plan to neutralize SCP-001, cleaning house and removing the temptation for future council members to make themselves immortal. In short, this was a coup. The O5 Council was going to be overthrown by their own Ethics Committee. Of course, the Council was more than prepared for this, and also had their very own mobile task force on hand to defend them against the plot. Alpha 1, also known under the codename Red Right Hand, the legendary lackeys of the O5 Council, clashed with the Law's Left Hand. It is believed that the shadowy administrator of the SCP Foundation also had his own personal task force, possibly Raish 1, also called the Seat of Consciousness, enter the fray. In other words, we were looking at an absolutely insane three-way Foundation Civil War bloodbath. How exciting. Security footage showed these three groups engaged in a firefight within Site-01, using Foundation training and tactics against each other in what would probably be the most epic battle of all of their lives. It was absolute chaos, the air thick with screams and gun smoke. Cameras also picked up a group of men and women lying all around Site-01, many wounded but still alive. Impressive, given how many of them had taken gunshots right to their heads. That's right. These were presumed to be the members of the O5 Council, still unable to die despite being shot. It is unclear which of the MTFs were responsible for this. The Ethics Committee had only intended Law's Left Hand to secure the Council members. It could well be that they were caught in the crossfire that occurred as the Law's Left Hand and Red Right Hand teams fought. Unless, of course, the Administrator's task force were the ones who had stepped in and shot the O5 Council. Through all the chaos that had unfurled, SCP-001 was still in his cell, and he wasn't alone. An unknown figure had somehow gained access, and he conversed with SCP-001. The man went on to tell SCP-001 that the Foundation was wrong to tamper with the nature of death, and recounted a story. He said that he had once filed paperwork regarding anomalies for an unknown organization, but couldn't live with the horror of what his job entailed. So the man sold these files to a group of 13 individuals, the O5 Council. They then went on to form a full organization, the SCP Foundation as we know it. The man then stated that he was disgusted with how the Foundation had used SCP-001, how the Council members had engineered the frail old man to make themselves immortal. He had hoped that they would be a force for good, keeping any necessary evil to a minimum. The unknown figure told SCP-001 that the conflict between the Council and the Ethics Committee had happened many times before, with many other versions of the old man. Earlier SCP-001s previously merged with the concept of death. He then helped SCP-001 identify the members of the Council, ending their immortality, promising the weak, tired old man that he'd finally be able to rest. The unknown mystery man claimed that he would always be in power. The O5 Council would always bring him back. After all, he was their figurehead, their leader, the SCP Foundation Administrator himself. In the end, the Administrator himself chose to let himself perish too, perhaps in shame of what his organization had become. Or did he? Because someone seems to have been accessing the Hellenstick AIC and the SCP-001 file using his login since this incident. Maybe the hand of death doesn't reach quite as far as we were led to believe. And that's where the tale of SCP-001 ends. A story of the Foundation's greed and their pursuit of eternal life. We mustn't forget that death isn't something to be afraid of. After all, it gives our lives meaning knowing that they will one day end. But when you look at the kind of monsters we can become in the pursuit of eternal life, well, in the words of another wise old man, sometimes dead is better. 1835. The American Frontier. A beacon of hope in a world choked with blood and smog. Little did the hopeful citizens of a still newly independent United States know
The evils of the old world had followed them here. Sometimes it took the form of hate, of violence, of desperation and starvation. But sometimes pure evil wasn't just some abstract concept existing in and around all of us. Sometimes that evil, that pure cruelty, malice, and greed, walks in the shape of a man. One such man was James Anderson, an unremarkable name for a truly exceptional man. Exceptional in the sense that if most human beings aren't willing to sell out all of humanity for their own petty gain, James Anderson is definitely the exception. After all, it's by his design that we have SCP-001, the anomaly that set the SCP Foundation and our entire reality down its current path. Of course, you know the deal with SCP-001. Not one anomaly, but many. A collective designation for a vast number of entries, all of which spell beginnings or ends for the SCP Foundation and sometimes even our universe. Scarlet Kings, Howling Black Moons, Ouroboros Cycles, and Gate Guardians. You've heard them all and seen the files. But unlike all the others, there is no file for the factory. That's because the full story only exists in the mind of 05-1. One of the most powerful and arguably the oldest member of the SCP Foundation. He'll die before he ever commits the story to paper. Some memories are just too awful to record. Their details and implications are too painful to ever subject others to. SCP-001 isn't just about Anderson and his atrocities. It's about all the terrible nightmares that unfolded afterward, and the deal with the devil that 05-1 struck to lock them away. For now, at least. But it all begins with James Anderson. His family had become incredibly wealthy in the Revolutionary War, and in the decades since, his fortune had only multiplied, as fortunes tend to do. In the early 1800s, he began work on his beautiful and horrific magnum opus, the Anderson Factory. It would be the pinnacle of the Industrial Revolution, the manufacturing plant to end all manufacturing plants. 3 stories tall and a mile wide. Company towns had existed for a long time, but this time, the factory itself was the town. It had everything a worker would ever need. They would live, sleep, play, and most importantly of all, work in the same place. They would never need to leave. All their wants and needs from cradle to grave would be met in the Anderson factory, and all that Mr. Anderson ever asked in return was loyalty and service. Was that really so much to ask from those whom he gave everything? It may sound like a horrifying form of indentured servitude to us, but to the people in the United States in the early 1830s, this kind of security and stability was a godsend. To many itinerant workers and unstable families across the plains, James Anderson seemed like a saint. Little did they know, his plans for the factory and them were anything but saintly. Nobody knows exactly what type of dark magic James Anderson devoted himself to. Many have theorized as to whether it was Satan he worshipped, ancient pagan deities, or something older and more powerful than both. In actuality, the only thing that James Anderson really worshipped was himself, and the pursuit of more material wealth and power over his fellow man. Any pacts he made with evil, timeless gods were just means to an end. The Anderson factory was a citadel to one man's cruelty and corruption, and every element of the building's design seemed to reflect that. Groups of 8 were forced into rooms together like battery-farmed chickens to maximize cost efficiency. People worked day and night in shifts of 3. Machines always rumbled and roared and chewed. When workers died in factory accidents and their blood spilled on the ground, it seemed to reveal arcane symbols carved into the stonework. These symbols were only visible when blood flowed across them. While people traveled hundreds of miles to live and work at the Anderson factory, they had no idea that they were working towards slavery, subjugation, and death under Anderson's iron will. And in some cases,
fates much, much worse. The factory remained in operation like this for 40 years, while Anderson himself enjoyed a positive public reputation as a groundbreaking industrialist. How Anderson got away with his crimes for so long is sadly a tale as old as time. The factory made valuable products and an awful lot of profit. So, no matter how many rumors swirled about inhumane practices or arcane rites going on in the Anderson factory, nothing was ever done. It was just too inconvenient to ever reckon with the horrible truth underneath the productive surface. And it was truly productive. The factory was so huge and filled with such a multitude of enslaved workers, there wasn't anything they didn't produce. From textiles to technology to crops and meat, the machines were always on. The furnaces always burned. Anderson himself seemed obsessed with two things: efficiency and misanthropy, the contempt and hatred for humanity itself. He believed his workers were lower than him. They only existed as a means to his nightmarish ends. And if ever the workers became too injured to work, well, that doesn't mean that Anderson wouldn't still find ways to put them to good use. The lucky ones, starved and neglected or broken by the stress of work or the grinding gears of the machines, were used as material in the production of products. Some were drained of blood so that they could be used in the forging of metal. Others were ground up into meat slurry and used to pad out the beef, making it go further. People all across the country enjoying fine Anderson brand steaks had no idea that they were actually dining on human flesh the whole time. But as we said, the ones who ended up being cooked into steaks and hamburgers after death were the lucky ones, because at least they got to die. The truly unlucky injured workers became the subject of James Anderson's horrific occult experiments. Using a mix of twisted science and black magic, he turned men into abominations, powerful, terrifying monsters stronger and more deadly than any mortal man. Anderson was building himself an anomalous army, but it wasn't just monsters. There were just as many so-called normal humans helping him rule over the Anderson factory with an iron fist. They were vicious sadists themselves, spurred on by absolute loyalty to their immoral master. It was only after the Civil War that someone finally escaped the Anderson factory and confirmed that not only were the most horrific rumors about the place true, but they didn't even come close to covering the totality of what was going on there. When President Grant heard the reports, he was disgusted. As far as he was concerned, the atrocities of James Anderson should not be allowed to go on a minute longer. The directive was simple: find the factory, free its prisoners, and put James Anderson to death for his crimes. And thankfully, President Grant had the perfect group of operatives for the job. They were an elite unit of around 150 soldiers who performed a number of dangerous missions beyond enemy lines down south. Espionage, assassination, psychological warfare. But these missions weren't just against the Confederates. Some of the enemies they faced down south were things that could not be explained. The strange, the frightening, the anomalous. And the highest-ranking soldier in this unit was a man who would one day become the legendary 05-1. He and his men made their long and treacherous journey to the factory, a trip that would change all of their lives forever. When they first reached their destination, they first had to deal with Anderson's security force. These were men whose cruelty and loyalty to Anderson far outweighed their skill in combat. While they may have felt powerful when tormenting starving, injured factory workers, they were quickly routed and slaughtered by 05-1 and his team. When they ventured inside the factory, they were utterly appalled by what they saw. The inhuman conditions faced by Anderson's thousands of victims drove them into a blood-curdling, murderous rage. Almost half of 05-1's men were lost in the battle against Anderson's army of engineered monsters, but in the end, they prevailed. Nothing would stop them in their quest for liberation and vengeance on behalf of all that this terrible place had tormented. They fought their way to Anderson's office, where they found him cowering under his desk. For a man as despicable as Anderson, only a truly medieval execution would suffice. 05-1 and his men hanged, drew, and quartered Anderson over a period of 2 days. The sadistic madman died laughing in the end, saying that while they may kill him, his factory will never die. But the factory was no longer his. In addition to the factory's horrors, 05-1 and his men also discovered its wonders. It wasn't just normal items and monsters that the factory produced. They were also thanks to some of Anderson's arcane deals, the world's leading producer of anomalous items. Skeletal horses that never tire, shadow cloaks that could transport the wearer to different dimensions, toy guns that fire real bullets, even yo-yos that could flay the skin from anyone they touched. These were anomalous objects that could shift the balance of global power, items that could give them an advantage against the things that go bump in the night. While others among them were greedy or fearful, the inner circle of 05-1 were united in a singular purpose. Using the anomalous, they can control to contain the anomalous that they can't. This group took over the factory, making it Site Alpha, their first ever containment facility, and came to be known as the 05 Council. With funding that came from a mix of blackmail and friends in high places, this organization, a burgeoning SCP Foundation, grew more and more powerful over the ensuing decades. The tools they gained from the factory were pivotal in the continued success of their mission, and as they discovered more anomalies, they also put these anomalies to good use. But in 1911, 05-1 and his new organization came up against an enemy that even the factory's tools couldn't help them defeat. A warrior race known as the Fae, so named because their only weakness seemed to be a vulnerability to iron. But these beings were an order of magnitude more powerful than humans, or the beasts they'd once faced in Anderson's factory. The Fae handed them defeat after defeat, but soon humiliation became decimation when an army of the Fae led an assault on the factory. It was a day that only 05-1 remembered. The Fae slaughtered everyone, every guard, every researcher, every member of the 05 Council. They swept through the factory like a plague of locusts, leaving only death and destruction in their wake. Only 05-1 escaped and survived, and that's only because he ran. As he fled from the fairy forces through the halls of the factory, he came upon a door he'd never seen before, a huge golden door covered in Aramaic script. He fled inside, entering the very heart of the factory. Inside, he saw the floating dead body of James Anderson, bathed in red light. Now he was little more than the mouthpiece of the factory itself, or rather the great and unknowable powers working behind it. The factory gave 05-1 an offer, just like the offer it had given Anderson before. It would give them the power to turn back time and destroy the Fae, saving everyone that they'd slain in the factory. But in exchange, all of them would forever belong to the factory. And in a moment of weakness and fear, 05-1 took the deal. The clock was turned back to before the battle. This time 05-1 and his compatriots, all of whom except him had no idea what had happened, had the horrific weapons required to slaughter the Fae. Weapons that nobody, mortal or otherwise, could possess. They repelled the invading force easily, but knowing the horrors that came before, 05-1 refused to stop there. With the power of the Foundation and the factory behind him, he hunted down and murdered every last fairy, driving their species entirely into extinction. As far as 05-1 was concerned, it was them or him. But with the Fae utterly destroyed and the Foundation's superiority assured, a shadow was laying over 05-1. He'd made a deal with the factory, and someday it would want its pound of flesh. 05-1, rather than facing the consequences of his actions, decided to run and hide. He had the factory decommissioned and buried under the rubble, never to be used as an active Foundation base again. But just because they were done with the factory doesn't mean that the factory was done with them. One day a toy gun appeared on 05-1's desk, a toy gun that fired real bullets, just like the ones they found in the factory a century before. The factory was still waiting for its repayment. With every anomalous item from the factory that the Foundation used, the terrible place only grew in its power. Since the resurgence, 05-1 has been sending the factory sacrifices, D-classes, dead and alive, as well as agents and researchers. But as time goes on, it seems that these sacrifices aren't satisfying the factory anymore. It wants more than O5-1 can ever stand to give it. And when O5-1 refuses to give, the factory will begin to take. And what the factory wants, sooner or later, the factory will get. It has been 1 month since the end of the world. 30 long days since Stella had watched her husband dissolve in front of her. 1 minute mowing the lawn like it was any other lazy afternoon, and the next collapsing into a useless pile of flesh and jelly. The end didn't come like she always thought it would, with hellfire raining down and pale riders galloping across the land on horseback. It began in the kitchen, with her humming a song to herself, mixing up a pitcher of lemonade before she rejoined her family in the sunshine. Then they were gone, lost forever when the sun turned wrong. She didn't even have time to grieve them properly before the threat turned on her, as the creatures that had once been her husband, her son, and her daughter swarmed to the door, slamming their new bodies against the wood with wet slaps, calling out to her in warped voices, begging her to step back outside. She covered her ears and wept for hours, until she had no tears left to cry. It didn't take long for Stella to figure out that whatever had happened to her family, it was happening all over the world. The small town she had known and loved had transformed into a hellscape, a maze of monsters and deadly light. She retreated underground to old mine shafts and tunnels, left abandoned decades ago when the local coal trade had dried up. There, she quickly discovered that she wasn't the only one with that idea. There were others, survivors, who had managed to make their way down into the dark, away from the horrors above. There weren't many, and she could never get too attached to the ones she did meet, in case they too were lost to the sun. But as the days wore on in the tunnels, she found herself forming a small group of stragglers. Not quite a family, but something that could be one day, and definitely much better than going it alone. There was Stella, of course, using her background as an elementary school teacher to keep everyone on track and working together. Then there was Brian, a former volunteer firefighter, whose training and skills with an axe came in handy more than once. There was Trina, a teenage girl who had been babysitting when everything went to hell, who had a knack for evading the flesh monsters and making supply runs. And then there was Doris, former military nurse and current de facto team medic, sharp and capable, in spite of being in her late 70s. They were brave people, brilliant, and refused to give up. Others came and went, spare survivors they picked up as they navigated their way, raiding the ruins of grocery stores and hospitals, but they always wound up leaving again. Or, worse, something would go wrong, and the sunlight would claim another victim. But the 4 of them stayed together, stronger with their combined skills, willpower, and ability to sleep in shifts and keep an eye out for trouble. After some time in the tunnels, the group had come across a massive abandoned facility. None of them could determine where it came from or what organization might have run it, but it appeared to have been some kind of research lab. It was isolated, cut off from outside influences better than any of their previous hideouts had been. Whoever had once worked here had cleared out, or been taken out in a hurry. But in their place, they had left behind rations, medical equipment, emergency generators, and clean drinking water. There were enough supplies to keep the group going for months, if they rationed carefully. And so they settled in. The abandoned research facility, whatever it once was, became their makeshift home. This unexpected sanctuary was cut off from the rest of the world. Clinical, cold, lonely, but a safe place for them to rest their heads. Now it had been a month since this all began. Stella shook her head at this realization, the passage of time feeling almost meaningless at this point. What did a month even mean anymore? What was a day when she couldn't even see the sun rise and set? As she sat there warming herself by the side of a foraged space heater, she thought about missing the stars, the moon, the promise of the cosmos. A time when the vast open sky was an invitation to dream instead of something to hide from. That time was gone now. There was nothing to do but mourn it and carry on, if not for her, then for the others. They had all found ways to keep busy in this new place. Trina took to exploring the empty halls, the laboratories filled with strange equipment, the small rooms that looked like prison cells or police interrogation rooms. She had cooked up some theory about it being a government facility, like something out of an old episode of The X-Files. Brian had found an on-site library filled with history books and scientific texts. There was enough to read in there, he said, that by the time he was finished, he would have the equivalent of several doctorate degrees. Doris had taken initial stock of all the medical supplies available at the site: gauze, disinfectant, vials upon vials of medications she had never heard of, and had categorized them all neatly. Now she spent her hours mostly sitting with Stella, telling her stories about whatever she felt like. Her time overseas, her late husband, their children, decades-old neighborhood gossip. It felt good to talk, no matter what it was about. It felt human. They all had their ways of keeping their grip on their own humanity. It had almost gotten boring, holed up in the facility without the constant threat of danger pressing in from all sides. Boring, but peaceful. Stella could feel herself starting to nod off, her eyelids sagging, her dinner of canned beans sitting heavy in her stomach. Next to her, Doris had already begun to softly snore. Soon sleep would come for her too, and bring with it dreams, memory of the life that was gone forever, the world as she had once known it. The dreams were tough, but waking up from them was even tougher. Still, she had to rest. She could only fight it for so long. She could almost hear her husband's voice when, "Hey, Stella, you might want to see this." Brian was there suddenly, his words breaking through the haze in her mind. His tone was severe, and she knew that sleep would have to wait. She followed him down the hall for a while, before he stopped and turned her attention to a section of a damaged wall. It was rusted and corroded, black and gray with massive cracks in the solid material. It looked like it had been slowly disintegrated over time by an incredibly strong acid. It was off-putting to look at, giving off the distinct sense that something bad had happened. But a lot of bad things had happened in the past month. "I don't really understand what I'm looking at," Stella said, and Brian grabbed her by the shoulders, commanding her attention. "This wasn't here yesterday. Hell, it wasn't here a few hours ago." He gestured to the damage. "It just happened, and whatever is responsible is probably still here." A chill ran down Stella's spine. It seemed impossible for this kind of structural damage to happen over the course of a few hours. She could see twisted steel rebar, drips of melted metal that had trickled onto the floor. As she leaned in for a closer look, she gagged. There was an overpowering stench of rot and decay. It didn't take long for her to spot the source: a thick, black mucus covering the hole in the wall, slick and slimy, and giving off the putrid smell. It wasn't like the material that had made up the flesh creatures outside. It was something else entirely. Something she had never seen before. She reached out a hand to touch it, but quickly caught herself. Whatever this stuff was, it was bad news. If it could do that to a solid wall, she didn't even want to think about what it could do to flesh and bone. "What do we do?" she asked. "Inspect the area, make sure it's safe, see if it's some kind of toxic waste leak or..." He didn't finish the thought. He didn't have to. They needed to find out if this damage came from something living, something that could be hiding in the building with them and waiting for the chance to strike. When they returned to the main room, Doris was awake and Trina was there waiting for them. They agreed to split into pairs and search the facility, looking for any additional damage, strange black fluid, or signs of foul play of any kind. Trina and Brian went one way, while Doris and Stella went the other, each person armed with a flashlight and a weapon of some kind: an axe, a bat, a knife. Stella had found a loaded pistol when they first arrived, one that she hoped she would never have to use. Now she carried it with her, just in case. Stella and Doris walked together for an hour, keeping an eye out for anything suspicious. They didn't find anything notable, really. There were some bits of rust they hadn't seen before, an occasional black puddle pooling on the floor, but nothing like the scene Brian had found. As they walked in silence, Stella found herself beginning to relax. Maybe the worst was over. Maybe a pipe had broken somewhere and broken down a bit of the wall, but nothing else would really come of it. Then, from the other side of the building, there came a high-pitched scream. She knew that voice immediately. Trina, screaming bloody murder, and Brian bellowing something. She grabbed Doris by the arm, and the two ran in the direction of the sound. As they got closer, they could hear other sounds in addition to Trina and Brian's yells. loud cracking like something solid coming apart, bits of rubble falling to the ground, and the wet dripping sound of something thick hitting the floor. As the two rounded the corner to see what was happening to help their friends, Stella froze in shock. She had seen some harrowing things since that fateful sunny day. She almost thought she had become desensitized to horror, that there was nothing left in the world that could faze her, but this moment proved her wrong. There was so much to take in and so little time. Brian was swinging his axe wildly at the floor, chopping at it helplessly in an attempt to break it apart. It quickly became obvious why. Trina was sinking into the floor, not through a hole into the basement below, but into the floor itself. It rippled and melted around her, changing from a solid surface to a thick pool of black sludge. She flailed and struggled, grasping at the ground around her, at Brian's arm, anything to yank herself free. But she wouldn't budge. She continued to sink. No, she wasn't just sinking. She was being pulled. Stella felt her legs begin to work again, and she rushed to Trina's side, grabbing hold of her arms with all the strength she had. All the while, Trina screamed in a mix of desperation, terror, and pain. Brian continued his assault on the ground, as if he could cut her free from the floor, and Doris moved to help Stella. She grabbed a hold of Trina's waist, but stopped suddenly. There, at the place where her body vanished into the floor, Trina was beginning to fall apart. Whatever had turned the floor into a portal, whatever had rotted away at the walls, it was taking its toll on her body too. The flesh falling away from the bone, the muscles liquefying, and everything becoming corrupted by that same black mucus. If they pulled any harder, Trina would be ripped in two, her chest, arms, and head on the surface, while her legs, stomach, and most of her vital organs were lost. There was no way to save her. Stella saw it when Doris did, and the two shared a long, sad look. Trina was here with them, still struggling for her life, but she was already gone. As if it felt their hopelessness, the force pulling on Trina from below then gave a horrifying yank they were praying to not have to witness, and she was swallowed up by the ground. All that remained was a sticky black smear, a large crack in the floor, and 3 survivors where there had just been 4. None of the remaining 3 slept a wink that night. Brian paced back and forth, holding his axe. Doris went over their supplies again, looking for anything that could be used to treat the effects of the corrosive black fluid, and Stella ran over their potential options again and again. They could stay and hope that the thing that took Trina never came back, or they could leave and face the possibility of succumbing to the sun or the influence of the creatures that once were people. She recalled dimly an old adage, "The devil you know beats the devil you don't." Maybe that was true. Maybe it would be better to take their chances with the outside rather than stay and be hunted. But she thought of her husband and children again, watching them melt onto the grass, and she shuddered. There were no good options here, but she couldn't risk going out like that. They would stay. Whatever had taken Trina, there were 3 of them, and only 1 of it. Besides, maybe it had already gotten what it wanted, and now it would move on. She didn't know it when she fell asleep, only that when she eventually woke up, she was alone. Brian and Doris were nowhere to be found. She called out their names as her heart leaped into her throat. For a moment, she feared the very worst. But then, Brian answered her. He had been patrolling, looking for signs of trouble, but he was fine. She asked if Doris was with him, and he went pale. He told Stella that Doris had gone to an on-site bathroom to get cleaned up hours ago, before he left. She should have been back by then. Without another thought, they took off towards the bathroom, and saw their worst fear realized. The door to the room was gone, rotted away, and Doris was gone with it. She had been taken before she even had the chance to scream. They stood there, taking in the reality of what had happened with silent shock. Then, a sound from behind caused them to turn around. It was a raspy, hollowed-out sound, like air forced from a dying man's lungs. A dry, empty, evil chuckle from an inhuman throat. There they saw the creature that had stolen their friends. From a distance, Stella could have confused it for a man. A very old, very sick man, but still human. As it shuffled closer, however, that illusion was shattered. Its eyes were black voids, its skin gray and putrefied, its mouth a gaping, toothless maw of shriveled black gums, and it was laughing at them. like it was enjoying itself. There was the smell again, that overpowering reek of all things foul. Stella drew her pistol and fired several shots. She didn't have the best aim, especially not when her hands were shaking with fear, but one of the bullets found its target and hit the creature in the cheek. It hissed, not in pain, but a perverse amusement, as the lead tore a hole through its flesh like wet paper. Globs of black blood spattered everywhere, spreading the rot wherever they landed. To her side, she heard Brian cry out in pain. When she turned, he was clutching his right eye. Some of the liquid had hit him there, and it was already taking effect. Stella's stomach turned as she saw something white slide down the side of Brian's face, his eye melting out of its socket. The skin around it followed suit, softening like putty and dribbling away from the bloody muscle underneath. Brian collapsed to the floor as the creature continued to advance on them, laughing louder and louder. It knew that bullets couldn't kill it, knew that there was nowhere to run. Stella grabbed a hold of Brian's arms, prepared to carry her fallen friend to safety, but he stopped her.
I'm done for,
he said quietly.
If you try to carry me, you are too.
She shook her head, unwilling to leave him behind, and he touched her cheek, forcing a smile on his decaying face.
I didn't think I'd make it this far. I wouldn't have without you. So run. Save yourself.
She could hear the resignation in his voice and knew that he would not let her save him.
I'll hold him off as long as I can,
Brian promised, and with tears in her eyes, Stella turned and ran as fast as she could. As her feet pounded the ground, blood rushing in her ears, she could hear Brian screaming and cursing at the creature until his voice quickly faded into a wet gurgle, and then silence. Stella sat in the center of the room that she and the others had once shared, clutching her scavenged pistol in her hands. Every creak, every errant sound made her jump. It could be anywhere, come from anywhere. She had escaped from so much already, survived more than anyone was ever meant to, had lost her love, her friends, her home. She wouldn't lose herself too. She held her breath as she heard it, clear in the darkness. Drip, drip, drip. Her grip on the weapon tightened, and she readied herself. If she had to go down, she might as well go down swinging. The old man, whether he was a man, a monster, or death itself, wouldn't be taking her anywhere, not without a fight. The Church of the Broken God. We've mentioned these machine-revering evangelists in a countless number of videos here on SCP Explained before, and it's because they're one of the most prolific groups of interest out there, with 300,000 active members across the globe. That we know of. They likely have more members and devotees than other iconic groups of interest, like the Serpent's Hand and the various cults of the Scarlet King combined. But how much do we really know about the Church of the Broken God? We've consulted Foundation historians and Mechanite scripture to find the answers and put together a truly comprehensive overview of this complex and often misjudged faction of the SCP Foundation multiverse. A faction that the Foundation may one day find themselves far more closely aligned with than they ever imagined to face an even greater foe. Give glory to the Broken God, and let us begin our journey into his teachings. The Church of the Broken God is a slightly more centralized group than the Serpent's Hand, though that really isn't saying much. They're split into 3 overall subgroups over a series of schisms that we'll delve deeper into later. The Broken Church, the Cogwork Orthodox Church, and the Church of Maxwellism. Before we get into the differences between these 3 groups, let's take a quick look at what unites them. All splinter cells of the Church worship the technological deity Mechane, known by many names, the most popular of which is the Broken God or Goddess. They all believe that Mechane was split into pieces and is lying dormant. They all revere machinery and technology over flesh, which they view as broken, weak, or corrupt. And without exception, all of them are the sworn mortal enemies of the Sarkists. Just for context, the Sarkists are the perfect equals and opposites to the Church of the Broken God. Under the leadership of the God King Grand Karcist Ion, and finding their origins in Mechane's counterpart, the primal and flesh-based Yaldabaoth, the Sarkists worship and revere the base concepts of flesh, corruption, and disease, despising everything that the Church stands for. It is important to make note of these facts, given just how much of the Church of the Broken Gods history is defined by their conflicts with the Sarkists. More on that later. The Broken Church is the oldest and most traditional of these three main sects. They are led by a man named Robert Bomaro, a Mechanite holy man who, in 1946, just after the Seventh Occult War, ascended from a mere collector of church-based anomalous trinkets to the title of Builder of God, after imbibing in SCP-017, also known as God's Ichor, and his broken blood. Of all of the church sects, the Broken Church is the most invested in conducting worship through active efforts to reconstruct the broken god and bring about Mekkane's second coming. Of course, those of you who are familiar with SCP-001, the Ouroboros cycle, will know that this sometimes has mixed results. After commissioning a counterfeit heart from the sinister folks at the factory, the Broken Church's most notable attempt at a full Mekkane resurrection went horrifically wrong, resulting in a huge mechanical abomination that tore its way across Mexico, devouring everything it could until eventually being brought down by SCP-2399, a giant space cannon known as the Malfunctioning Destroyer. Anyway, now for a sect with a slightly less overtly destructive method of worshipping Mekkane, the Cogwork Orthodox Church, whom you may remember as the ones who gave Alexei Belitrov sanctuary after he was eventually freed from SCP Foundation containment. These worshippers innovated a practice known as standardization, which involved undergoing mechanical enhancement in order to appear closer to their maker. However, we aren't talking about sleek, technologically advanced cyborg parts here. The religious aesthetic of the Cogwork Orthodox is heavily inspired by the Industrial Revolution, with an emphasis on components such as gears or cogs. As such, members of the church who have undergone extensive modifications to remake themselves in the image of their god will often make loud ticking or tapping sounds, leading to the derogatory nickname tickers, often used among the other two sects. However, a major advantage of the church is that it is heavily organized and regulated from the top down, with rigid systems and strict rules against electrical or digital technology. Think of them as Catholicism to the Broken Church's Protestantism. The Cogwork Orthodoxy keeps to themselves, but we do know a great deal about their internal command structures. The orders of the Cogwork Orthodox Church are as follows. At the very top of the pyramid are the Patriarchs, a mysterious and insular group who have the ultimate word on church matters, and release missives that will later become the Schema, the church's holy text. Below them are the Schematists Faithful, scholars and scribes who write and record the Schema from the aforementioned teachings and commands of the Patriarchs. Legates Faithful are the internal affairs orders of the Cogwork Orthodox Church. They investigate matters going on within the faith, such as weeding out heretics and meditating internal disputes. They're one of the two orders permitted to carry weapons, the others being Militants Faithful, who act as the self-defense wing, keeping the church safe from external threats and acting as ambassadors to outside groups. The next two orders are the Fabricators Faithful and the Inventors Faithful. The Fabricators act as foremen who oversee production on church properties, ensuring that only the finest quality is achieved. That's because, in addition to standardization, the Cogwork Orthodox Church believes that mass production of items using Industrial Revolution methods is also a viable form of worship for Mekkane. This brings us to the inventors. They come up with new methods and designs for standardization and go on quests and explorations to discover the answers to any questions the church may have. But our information on the Cogwork Orthodox Church doesn't end there. Thanks to their truly extensive writings, we even know about the multitude of saints that the church reveres and their various purposes to followers of the church. For example, Saint Legate Tronion. She was the sneaky and covert patron saint of the Legates Faithful. There was also Saint Schematis Platon. She's the patron saint of the written word, of editors, of timetables, and of diagrammatic organization. Patron saint of the Inventors Faithful, of designers, of repairmen, and of cognition engines. Saint Scranton, patron saint of spatial fabric manipulation, higher dimension mathematics, and anthracite coal extraction. Saint Fabricator Baffle, patron saint of workflow and the assembly line. Saint Inventor Chalk, patron saint of chorists, and saint inventor Enrichner, patron saint of the Entelechidid. They have a pretty rigid structure and extensively recorded mythology is what we're saying here, just in case that didn't come across. This brings us to the Church of Maxwellism, the newest and smallest of the sects, as well as the least combative. However, they pose the greatest threat of all to the SCP Foundation's quest to maintain a veneer of normality. That's because Maxwellists forego the extensive standardized body modifications of the Church of the Cogwork Orthodox, and instead prefer smaller internal implants that allow them to interface directly with the internet from their brains. This allows them to fulfill their primary goal, spreading the good word of Mechane, whom they refer to as WAN, all across the globe using the information superhighway, while also netting them the nickname Hummers among the other two sects. In contrast to the conformist elements of their sister organizations, Maxwellists embrace their individuality and unique traits, being highly decentralized but very communicative with their fellow believers. They believe WAN is a fragmented god, existing in the world of digitized data rather than clunky old hardware. With their extreme internet savvy, it's likely that they've brought in many new converts to the Broken God's cause, despite them being the youngest of all the overall religion sects. But now we have an overview of the state of the Church of the Broken God today. We must ask ourselves a second question. How did we get here? What is the history of the Church? To find the answer, we need to go back, before the modern era, before the SCP Foundation, before even humanity itself. It begins when Mechane and Yaldabaoth created humanity. Yaldabaoth created the bodies of human beings, primal sensual creatures driven by base instincts and urges, and Mechane gave them their minds, reasonable, logical, and compassionate. For a time, the two would preside over mankind in harmony, but things would not stay that way forever. One of the earliest civilizations that the Foundation discovered interacting with these two deities was the anomalous Xia dynasty, sometimes also referred to as the Xia culture group, which reigned in China from 2100 to 1600 BCE, though the only sources that confirm the very existence of the Xia dynasty are anomalous. It was here that we heard the first whispers of the cult of the Broken God. To the Xia dynasty, the being we would later call Mechane was known as the Father Serpent Fuxi, and Yaldabaoth was known as Mother Dragon Nyowa. Because the Xia dynasty was anomalous all the way down, scholars of Father Serpent Fuxi were said to practice the Way of the Serpent, as he has always been associated with knowledge. The Way of the Serpent involved undergoing a physical transformation into a snake-like being to better resemble the deity, much like how modern Cogwork Orthodox Church followers try to reshape their bodies to better resemble their creator today. According to Xia dynasty scripture, which would form the basis of the entire belief system of all sects of the church, Fuxi broke down his own body and transformed himself into a brass cage around Mother Dragon Nyowa. However, unlike later iterations of the faith, the Xia dynasty believed it was extremely important to see that the body of Fuxi is never rebuilt, because to do so would lead to the release of Mother Dragon Nyowa and the end of the world. The civilization was started by a mythic figure known as the Yellow Emperor, who led the Xia dynasty to defeat other Fuxi and Nyowa worshippers, then folding them into their own culture. Like many civilizations touched by Mechane, the Xia dynasty was incredibly scientifically advanced and skilled with metalworking. There's even evidence that the Xia dynasty created their own forms of the computer with effective artificial intelligence, as well as reality warping devices and even devices capable of interstellar travel. While the illustrious Xia dynasty would now be brought to its knees by a race of creatures known only as the Golden Crows, the next iteration of Broken God ancestors would be far closer to the worshippers we'd recognize today. This was the beginning of the Mechanite Empire, and by extension, the First War of the Flesh, the legendary extended conflict between the Mechanites and the Sarkists in the ancient world. Broken God cults were detected in Mycenaean Greece, a Greek civilization spanning the years 1600 to 1100 BCE. It was here where the Broken God first took up the name Mechane, and eventually he amassed enough followers to allow the theocratic Mechanite Empire to truly be born, and it would remain in power from 1200 to 1000 BCE. Much like the church in the modern day, the Mechanite Empire saw the marriage of theocracy, politics, and classical military dictatorship. And much like the Shah dynasty before it, it was marked by both tight structure and control, as well as incredible metallurgic production and technological advancement, partly due to considering all of these to be holy acts. They had strong strategic relations with Egypt, Assyria, and Canaan, and their mix of commercial strength and a dominant naval presence gave them serious geopolitical standing, even if their highly evangelical attitude didn't always win them friends on the world stage. A number of roots for modern Church of the Broken God beliefs were clearly established here, including the paradigm shift from wanting to avoid Mechaine's rebuilding to expediting the rebuilding. Texts made around this time were also the first to contain references to the name Wan as an alternate title for Mechain, revealing the basis for later Maxwellist practices in the modern day. However, as we alluded to before, despite these incredible advancements, the true ravages of the First War of Flesh were upon the Mechanites here. The Sarkists, who had established the Adium Empire, were on the offensive. Thanks to Grand Karcist Ion and his Karcist minions, the Karcists, by the way, were high-level followers of Sarkicism capable of performing flesh magic. The Sarkist forces were more powerful than ever before. They had mobilized their troops and brought in trump cards the likes of which the Mechanites had never seen before. Giant flesh beasts that acted as living siege weapons. Human warriors turned into deadly monsters with Sarkic magic. And the most deadly of all, a bioweapon that the Mechanites called the Red Death at the time, though we know it better as the flesh that hates. As is often the case in war, this led to unprecedented advancements in technology on the side of the Mechanites too. The most notable example perhaps being SCP-006, an incredible weapon of war known as the Colossus, which made for a formidable tool against the teeming forces of the Adium Empire. However, the advancements on both sides only made the war all the more brutal, with scores dying on both sides and both empires being severely weakened as the conflict stretched on. Things got so desperate for the Mechanites that they even joined forces with the infamously ruthless and savage Davites, the worshippers of the Scarlet King, to defeat the Sarkists. The decisive battle of the First War of Flesh was the Siege of Gyros, the Sarkic capital of Greece, where Mechanites eventually breached the stronghold and slaughtered the Karcists within. Another missive sent from the Sarkist field commander Karcist Tundas read,
Grand Karcist Ion, may this missive find you at Kaithira, for it shall be my last. Our enemies have begun their assault on the island. The fallen kingdoms and followers of Mechain have united against us, even as their nations crumble. The wounds sustained today will heal. Into the ages of ages we are undying. I vow that none are to leave this island alive. We summon the Red Death. For the blood of heathens, we sacrifice ourselves. We will meet again in Aditum.
But while the Mechanite Empire won the war, they didn't survive it. Due to the people lost and the resources expended, the empire fully collapsed shortly afterwards. Some survivors renounced their Mechanite faith and entered other cultures. Some splintered off to preach and practice mechanism elsewhere. The remainder settled on the secretive island of Amani to form their own city-state. Here they replenished their numbers and forces over the centuries, maintaining secrecy to avoid intervention from outsiders and vengeful Sarkists. By the 6th century BCE, the Mechanites from the city-state of Amani were developing a degree of regional power once more, thanks to the boon provided by their advanced technology. They were no longer a military powerhouse, but the tiny state instead became a trade juggernaut, providing mechanical goods and weapons to nearby civilizations that in turn provided the protection that the Mechanites so sorely required. Their cultures would later be influenced by the Roman Empire and various Pythagorean cults, who inspired a love of numerology and cosmic harmony in this ancient civilization, returning shakily to its feet. The 5th century BCE became known as the Golden Age of Mechanite literature, and the state continued to grow through military alliances with the Achaemenid Empire and the Kingdom of Carthage. However, the city-state of Amani was eventually wiped out for good in the 1st century BCE. Followers of the Broken God faith remained, but they were scattered to the wind for almost 2,000 years, until the Industrial Revolution struck the Western world. Seeing the great machines of industry rise up seemingly overnight convinced the lingering cells of broken god worshippers that perhaps, after a millennia, Mechane was now preparing to return. They assembled into what is now known as the Broken Church and began preaching the good word. And considering the industrial fever of raw, unfettered progress gripping the world at the time, the Gospel of Mechane seemed to be an attractive prospect indeed. Meanwhile, debate was raging inside the ever-growing church about the nature of adapting oneself mechanically, a practice that had been out of fashion since the days of the original Mechanites. Broken Church loyalists believed that modification through any means other than drinking the god's ichor, like Robert Bramaro would later do, is an insult to Mechane. Others, however, saw it as a tribute and a way of getting closer to their creator. This was the issue that caused the first New Age schism and led to the formation of the Cogwork Orthodox Church during the 1840s. The faith would never be the same after this. The various broken god splinter cells found a lucrative market in converting wealthy industrial oligarchs of the production boom and talking them into becoming glorified sugar daddies for their various new augmentation experiments, all to becoming post-Nibbanic beings, meaning mechanical entities who leave the unreliable world of flesh behind for good and commune with the shiny metal infinite. In exchange, these industrialists would be provided with advanced mechanite knowledge of manufacturing, as well as technology far beyond their years. Everyone was a winner, well, except the SCP Foundation, but we'll touch on that whole debacle soon. By the closing of the 19th century, it seemed like the Cogwork Orthodox Church might totally outmode its predecessors at the Broken Church. However, the early 20th century would bring the mysterious Robert Bramaro onto the scene. Bramaro was a mysterious man with unknown abilities and connections, but he soon commanded power and respect, taking over the Broken Church and even being taken seriously in rival sects. He gathered up a group of trusted enforcers and augmented them into his disciples, supposedly being able to speak directly to Mechane. He and his loyalists collected hundreds of artifacts relating to the broken god, blowing the minds of all involved with just how quickly he was able to do so. He disappeared in 1943 and was gone for 3 years, during which time he conducted the famous God's Ichor ceremony and returned to his people as the self-styled Builder of God. This made him an even more esteemed figure across the world of the broken god, a kind of Pope of Mechane, supposedly bearing a direct line of contact with the divine. There would be a defining schism in the late 20th century that produced the Church of Maxwellism, as some wished to move beyond the outdated dogma of the Cogwork Orthodox Church and began administering electronic augmentations rather than just analog machinery. This resulted in a huge controversy for church members, as the patriarchs reacted swiftly with a slew of excommunications. Those excommunicated would soon become the first wave of Maxwellists and take the tenets of the broken god into the internet age. All of these groups have made trouble for the Foundation in their own way, from the online evangelizing of Maxwellists leaking classified knowledge to the weirdness of the Cogwork tickers being impossible to ignore, to the frequent battles between the Foundation and the Broken Church over items which they believe to be parts of Mechane. However, if certain prophecies are to be believed, the relationship between the Foundation and the Church won't remain frosty forever. One day, perhaps they'll even stand metal to fleshy shoulder beside the Sarkists too, against a threat far more dangerous than all of them combined. Now go check out SCP-2217 Hammer and Anvil and SCP-001 The Broken God or Borocycle for more on the fascinating Church of the Broken God.